Welcome to the Plastic Pleasing Store podcast.
We are your hosts, Trey the Explainer,
and me, Miles Greb.
A podcast about the natural world,
things that people claim are part of the natural world,
and things that used to be.
Okay, buddy, we're back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Hey, Miles, how you doing?
I'm doing good, buddy. I hear that your legs are sore.
That's right. I just came out of horseback riding, and I wore the wrong pants.
Yeah, smart.
And, my calves are red raw, and then also the shaping curled up my leg hair.
Yeah,
like curlers. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm doing
that's
good.
Good. That's good, buddy.
Possum. I rode the one-eyed horse. He was awesome.
How
about you? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I was up hanging out with my friends last night playing the old Lord of the Rings card game from the 20s.
Oh, there's a card from the 20s?
I said the 20s. I meant to say from 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But I said the 20s. So just imagine it's from the 20s. That'd be cooler. Because that predates the publication of the novel. So, that'd be very interesting. Archaeologists would have to change a lot of their theories.
The timeline, yeah.
Yeah, the timeline's totally going to be undone. So.
Who's the most powerful character, card in the card game?
So I've only played the first 3 sets so far, which is just the first movie. But I know that I have cards I've seen. The power is tied between Sauron, the Balrog, and Tom Bombadil. They all have the highest inherent power.
Oh, that's cool. Tom Bombadil, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he got fucking boots so yellow,
And he put on the ring, right, and had no power over him?
That's correct. The ring has no power over him whatsoever. He's a jolly old soul who lives with his hottie down by the river, and he just gets drunk and smokes and sings songs and yells at trees.
It's a pretty based character right there.
Yeah, he's having a great time, That's the true power. The true power in life is to get you all that stuff put together, and then, evil can't affect you. So good luck, everyone. Okay, but this isn't like an emergency podcast, but this is like a special podcast because one of the top shows on Netflix right now is about something we talk about, but not the way that we like to talk about it.
Yes. Yeah. No, I would call this an emergency podcast.
Emergency podcast.
Because this needs to be dealt with. This is the amount of people I know that are aware of this show is crazy.
All right. So this is an existential moment in archaeology and people who talk about archaeology on the internet.
Yes.
So basically, Netflix has a new special which has been up to rank number 2 and in the top 10 for several days now, so getting millions and millions of views, and it's called Ancient Apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
And this show is hosted and based around the theories of Graham Hancock, who is not an archaeologist, but he is a former journalist who's now claiming to use his...
He's a science fiction author now. Basically.
Well, yeah, maybe, but one thing is, on this Trey,
yeah,
I'm sure a lot of people that like the special are going to listen to this podcast because I'll put it in their form and stuff. So, although we of course don't agree with Graham, I would like the people that do to try to hear us out and say why people like us aren't taken in by this and actually have a problem with it,
Yeah.
So I hope.
Yeah.
You guys will stick around because we'll give some of his better arguments. I think they're fair due. But yeah, we're going to clown on the guy a bit because, if someone's saying some crazy stuff, they're going to get clowned on,
Some of this stuff deserves to be criticized and critiqued because it's... Yeah. I will say one thing, the show, it's the show, if you ignore the information, the little CGI recreations aren't too bad. There's some stuff. I will give credit where credit's due, but yeah.
They're a little better than Monster Quest CGI.
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know. I always love seeing archaeological reconstructions in CG, so it's kind of good to nice.
Yeah, I don't know if all of them were, I would say, accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look cool. But anyway, so the
Cholula Pyramid I was criticizing.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So this is Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock, who is one of the most known writers of the ancient world, although he is not. His hypotheses and his writings are normally not considered to be in the scientific field or accepted by the people who study this for a living. But because he's so popular, we felt we should address this. And we're bringing in a ringer to help us this episode.
Yeah.
Plato himself.
Man, I really wish I'd looked up how to say hello in Greek before putting my
that would've
screen
been
name
good.
as Plato.
Yeah, well, you put your name in the chat as Plato, so I was thinking we were bringing in the guy himself, you know.
That'd be great. Like if you just like were posing as Plato the entire podcast. Like, yes, I
That'd
did
be a
not
lot of work.
intend.
He just talks in Greek, and we're like, oh, okay, well, that's.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
thought it was going to be a great idea to have Plato on, but really, we can't talk to him at all.
I just pose like really challenging philosophical questions. Never reveal my own opinion. Plato style.
Yeah. No, but it's not Plato. It's the next best thing, and it's Stefan Milo. So.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Yes. So you've been on the pod before, friend of the pod. But how about you introduce yourself in case anyone missed your last episode?
Yeah. My name's Stefan Milo, and I kind of feel like I'm a Graham Hancock-esque figure.
Oh.
Because I just try and bridge the gap between academia and the public, make cool-ass videos about the ancient world. But I just ask archaeologists instead. Just the information just comes from archaeologists. So.
And don't edit around them, like, and manipulate what they say to fit your narrative.
No. Not too much anyway. No, I don't do that.
Yeah, some really fantastic videos. The one about the life and death of Lucy is definitely a standout, Jim. If you want to check him out, I'd recommend that one. You have some that I thought were great, like the prehistory of Vietnam was really interesting to me because it's something a lot of people didn't talk about. So yeah, some really fantastic stuff, and I
your videos are
recommend
awesome. Your videos are awesome, dude. I just wanted to say that.
Thanks.
They're
guys.
better than mine. Mine are kind of crap compared to yours. Yours are awesome. I like strive.
Yours have so much heart, man. On film, come on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I learned how to do animations with that.
None of them have animations as good as the spirit science videos. You guys remember those?
Oh shoot, yeah, spirit science. Did we talk about spirit science last time?
I don't know, but that guy, I remember watching those. It's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Spirit science. That must not have. Is that like a thing they showed you in school?
No,
no. It's like he was an animator or something like that before.
Yeah, he was an animator who basically got into all these pseudo archaeological and like pseudo philosophical,
neo spiritual, like
he's a bunch of new age stuff, and he would make these videos about it, and they're pretty popular. And if you watch archaeology or anthropology topics on YouTube, the algorithm used to bring his stuff to you all the time. So.
Yeah,
I never caught that guy.
Yeah, dodged a bullet.
He's kind of funny to watch, though. Like, because he believes like Hebrews are aliens and stuff like that. Yeah,
always good to be making up new conspiracies about the Hebrews because there's not enough of them, right? There's just not those people don't have enough conspiracies targeting them. So
yeah, that immediately makes him sound like a Nazi, honestly.
Yeah, well, he
believes that all his information came from Thoth or Toth, like an Egyptian god.
Yeah, he's the Egyptian god who gave people writing.
Yes.
He's like Prometheus in Egypt, basically. Not the movie, which is banned from this podcast.
We just bring up Prometheus like every episode now.
I don't know why.
It's fucking funny.
God damn.
It's like like on cinema, like how they bring up the stupid Star Trek if it's filmed in San Francisco or not.
Dude, that's the best debate. Okay, we can't get into that. I want to talk to you about that, Trey, but it will alienate our listeners.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Anyways, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the show Ancient Apocalypse episode by episode and talk about our thoughts. Like, what are people who we're kind of in SciComm. We're not at these sites, but he's not an archaeologist, and I'm not an archeologist, but we can both analyze this stuff. Just like the people.
He's admittedly not an archaeologist, like he says that first episode.
Yeah. So we're a group of people that love this stuff, try to research this stuff, try to look at it, and come at it from different perspectives. So GH is going to have his perspective, and we're going to have ours, and people can determine which one they think is more valid. I think what we should do first here is there's basically two competing, I don't want to call them hypotheses, but storylines, right? There's two storylines of how human civilization came to be where they are. Stefan, do you think you could give kind of like the Cliff Notes version in like 4 or 5 minutes of like from the last like 120,000 years, what's like the story of humans? Where'd we come from? How did we get here? According to
that's
science.
A very easy summary.
Just do it perfectly, please, off the cuff. I
Summarize
appreciate
all
it.
of human history. Yeah. Well, basically, let's say we're starting the clock. Say, I don't know, 100,000 years ago. There are multiple human species living around the world, with the probable exception at that time of Australia and the Americas. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans, whoever they were, over in Asia, Homo sapiens in Africa. And these are all, you should really think of all these as just like points on a spectrum rather than distinct groups, because at some point, a group of Homo sapiens spread out around the world, banged all the other groups. DNA is within us now. And so from, say, 60,000 years ago, maybe from 60...
I can edit you, by the way, if you want to it's fine, so fix what you want to say if you want. I'll fix it. So.
No way. Keep all of this in, even the comment about editing.
I kept Trey hanging out with his cat in last time. So.
Yeah. I was like, my cat was attacking me.
Yeah. And so let's say they left Africa roughly between, we don't know when exactly, but between 50 and 70,000 years ago is the best guess from genetics. They may not have been the first Homo sapiens to leave Africa, but they're just the group that we descend from. For whatever reason at that time, there was a particularly successful migration that shagged everyone. All the other groups either get absorbed into our population or die out. And so from, say, 30,000 years ago, it's just Homo sapiens. We're all over the world by then, probably. Every continent. Maybe not South America. I don't know. Highly debated, which Graham Hancock talks about. But and you got to remember, this is the height of the Ice Age. So populations are hunter-gatherers. The climate is quite erratic. In the northern hemisphere particularly, it's way colder, like Britain, under ice. All of Northern Europe, under ice. Like, absolutely no one's living there for sure.
Not even ice giants?
Not even ice giants, I would bet. No, I would bet not.
Okay, well, I'm marking you down for that. So when we find that, expect a call.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Graham Hancock would call these people simple hunter-gatherers. And I hate that word simple. No one studies the Paleolithic would consider these people simple. They're creating extraordinary works of art. They're adapting to an enormous variety of climates. Like, Homo sapiens had reached the far north of Siberia, like the north coast of Russia, by 45,000 years ago. So they're very adaptable, very capable, and were capable of extraordinary things. But they weren't living urban lives as farmers. And that didn't really start to kick off until about roughly, I don't know, between 10 to 12,000 years ago. Climate started warming. There's like this period called the boiling Adderod. Then it dipped again. And then it came out of that dip. And that like fluctuation was like the last hurrah of the Ice Age. It's called like the boiling Adderod and the Younger Dryas. And then since that time period, the climate has been much more warm, much more stable. People began to lead more sedentary lives. This leads to agriculture. This leads to everything else that we enjoy today. Taco Bell being the ultimate conclusion of all of this development.
I mean, you laugh, but the fact that you can work for an hour and then like afford 25 burritos is pretty awesome. Like, it is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, so. I'm no Taco Bell hater for sure. But yeah, that's basically that's like obviously the briefest possible introduction to like the Paleolithic to the Neolithic. Yeah.
And then modern history happens, right?
Yeah, the cities get bigger, life gets more complicated. Eventually we write stuff down,
kill each other over gods, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely mental with the killing.
Invent Star Wars, destroy Star Wars. Okay, so that's one story that could have happened, right?
Yeah.
But what if humans, we evolved through who knows what? Maybe we were in early Africa. Perhaps we took psychedelics and it started to expand our mind.
Oh, the
And
mushroom thing.
what if we went out and we explored, and eventually all of our knowledge has had different technologies that we had today, technologies that the modern world can't quite comprehend and might not be ready for, led us to create a society before this split in the Ice Age, a society that was as large, perhaps, as the British Empire.
That's global, right?
Yes, and sent people out, emissaries to explore. What if they had the powers to move things psychedelically with their mind, powers of energy and the ability to affect plasmoids, things that Tesla might have talked about, hidden knowledge, secret knowledge. They built these pyramids. Now, people might say, oh, they built pyramids because you stack things on top of each other. But look at the sacred geometry of the triangle. There's a real power in here. They're communicating something because, after all, people aren't just material. We're a soul and we're a body. And the soul speaks from the heavens, and it comes to us, and it gives us a powerful knowledge. Scientists ignore this when trying to understand the history of the world. But you see, when you look at it this way, you can tell that these people built these things because of a connected, powerful reason. And then after, there was a cataclysm. There were floods. A comet struck the earth. And the civilization, perhaps it is Atlantis itself, was destroyed. But thankfully, they sent out magicians, these emissaries, these people who knew how to rebuild and do things right. And they went out to the corners of the world, and they found the simple hunter-gatherers who couldn't figure things out for themselves, and they weren't ready to do it. They didn't have the sacred power and knowledge of this hidden civilization, and they taught them how to build. And what they built was stones that warned the people in the future about another possible cataclysm that could happen, and they used warnings of simple animal figures that the people would be able to see, that perhaps people in the future could interpret, although who knows, because they really just drew some stuff on stone. And that's what really happened.
Was that quoting like a book or something?
No, I have read his three of his books and listened to about, I don't know, 10 hours of him talking.
Oh man.
And that is basically his thesis, as I understand it. I do not think I strawmanned him at all. I think that is his thesis. So
does he believe in like
Stefan?
I probably wouldn't have put it so dramatically.
Well, yeah, you know, I'm the writer. I gotta.
Does he believe in like sacred geometry and like that kind of stuff?
Yes,
I think he does.
And psychic stuff. Is that
now? I
think the key thing is we're looking at technologies that are not the same as ours.
Yes.
And that's partly why archaeologists can't see them, because they're looking for us in the past, and they're not open to the possibility that there are whole other kinds of technology that could be used.
Right.
I always go back to the ancient Egyptian traditions that speak of priests chanting as these huge blocks were lifted into the air. Were they using some kind of sound effect, some kind of use of sound?
We'll couch some of this for the end.
Okay.
But I'll explain why I think he thinks what he thinks in more detail.
Okay.
But I think that's basically his thesis, unless Stefan disagrees.
That it's kept vague in the series, but from what I gather, he believes that there's a sophisticated, but he never clarifies how sophisticated, global civilization before the Ice Age of humans, right?
Yeah. Basically, he thinks that, like, nestled in that story that I told, a civilization could have achieved. Again, as you say, he never specifies how advanced, and they throw the word advanced around. You know, Göbekli Tepe is advanced, but
sophisticated, and it's not clarifying.
And it is. But
because like when he says okay, I'm like, okay, do they have metallurgy? Do they have they invented bronze or stuff like? And he never really clarifies that.
I don't think he ever clarifies that. But
there's a reason he doesn't, and I'll save that to the end.
Okay.
Episode 1.
Okay, this one was titled. It was titled like a long clumsy flood, or there was a great flood or something. And and it was introducing you to Graham Hancock, and he's in Java, Gunung Padang. It's this site in Java that he and it's on like this dormant or dead volcanic hill, and it has a lot of pillars. Like I think it's very large stone pillars.
They're igneous rock.
Igneous rock. Okay.
Yeah, so this is a volcanic site. It's confirmed to be a volcanic site, and they believe so as well. And this is all igneous rock that came up from this area. So
it's kind of like for the British listeners and Irish listeners, Giant's Causeway.
I was saying that to my dad. It looks like Giant's Causeway, and it's yeah.
Those whatever process in a volcano creates those like columns of rock. They've like separated them and arranged them into this temple complex. It seems that ancient Indonesians did.
Yeah, and Graham Hancock, this is like his introduction to like, okay, this is this big megalithic site, and he disagrees with the dating. Like the mainstream archaeologists date it to, I think like the 500s AD, something like that. But he dates it to like 4,000 years, 5,000 years ago. Deep in time,
25 up to 25,000.
Oh, because he goes even because his dating is all over the place with a lot of things. Like he goes from like 300 BC to 3,000, and then he goes all the way up to like 20,000.
So his hypothesis is that this is a man-made structure that is a pyramid built on top of other pyramids built on top of other pyramids.
Yes, he uses the word pyramid. You're right.
Yeah, and that there are several chambers inside of this structure that have not been explored or confirmed yet, but they show that this was used as a sacred site for many, many centuries.
Yeah, I feel like we need to. I feel like we got to throw this caveat out here. I got to say this before we go any further.
All right.
Like there's like a rhetorical trick almost with Hancock, where because he has these outlandish theories, it forces us to sort of dial it back a bit and talk in the negative about sites that we also actually think are incredible.
Yeah.
And that's the most annoying thing about it. So I just want to put it, he makes it seem like archaeologists aren't interested in this place. I think it's a spectacular place.
Yeah, I put that same exact like idea in my notes, where like there's these sites are like very impressive and beautiful, and there's like no need to make them more interesting than they already are.
Yeah, if you don't mind a sports analogy, like during the draft, like they'll compare younger players to like possibly players in the league. Somebody might say, "Oh, I think this guy's a really good player. He could average 20 points a game in basketball." And other guy's like, "Well, I think he's going to be exactly Michael Jordan and just as good or maybe better than him." And you're like, "Well, dude, he's not going to be Michael Jordan." And he's like, "Well, why are you so negative on him?" And you're like, "Well, I'm not negative on him. I think he's going to score 20 points a game." Like that's kind of basically what he's doing. He's saying things are like extra outlandish. We're like, well, they're really cool. They're just not whatever weird thing you said. And so it makes us seem negative and him seem positive.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I just wanted to put that out there in case any of his fans are listening and think like, look at these Debbie Downers hating on Gunung Padang.
So like I didn't know that much about Padang, right? So like that's one thing that I think makes the show interesting to people. You're like, oh wow, look at that site. That is awesome, right? Like as a natural site, regardless of the human interaction with it, just to see all those volcanic rocks like created and like up on this beautiful hill, it's awesome. Like it's just a really cool thing to learn about. And so for a lot of people, I think, because like I didn't even know about this site, it's your first introduction to it. So you're like, wow, why hasn't anybody told me this? And then Hancock's like, I'll tell you why anyone hasn't told you about this, because it breaks the archaeological model. And then he explains why. So like he's taking you down a story, And so I think it's easy to follow him there. So this site got a lot of mainstream attention about 4 years ago, right? When the idea of it being a lost pyramid was really kind of hitting the mainstream. And it seems like there was a large local government push to make that true. The person who's supposedly the archaeologist managing the site has a relationship with the political leaders in that nation, and they want it to be a lost pyramid because it is good for them nationally, right? Because they're like, it gives them national pride that they have one of the oldest, if not the oldest, of these large lost pyramids. And additionally, it'd be a fantastic tourist site. So there's a lot of politics wrapped up in that hypothesis as well.
Yeah, there is. I did hear that as well, but there has been a political change in Indonesia since then. So I think all of that funding and attention is gone from the Indonesian side.
Yeah, they were going to dig in and excavate some of the site, but they are no longer allowed to do that. So.
Okay.
The archaeologists overthrew the government to keep it secret.
Yeah. Those censor archaeologists are trying to hide the site.
So if you are a fan of the show, you're like, well, why don't you guys want to know what's inside there? Why would you guys not want to?
Well, I think we do, right?
Yeah. So we do want to know all these things. One of the main points I want to make is none of us here think we know everything that happened in the past, right?
No, yeah.
Like
Sure not.
Yeah, we bemoan the loss of knowledge. Like we think about this stuff and it means a lot to us and we really want to know more. There's so much that's lost. And that's why people do archaeology. But the reason why it can seem rigid at times is because we don't want to make mistakes. We want to actually know things, not just say things. And that requires a scientific method to make sure there's a process of actually making sure we're on the right path is all.
No, you're wrong, Miles. To quote
shit.
Graham Hancock, archaeologists are threatened by outsiders and are fiercely territorial. And so apparently,
archaeology was founded by an idiot outsider with a bunch of dynamite, basically. Like Schliemann is basically the founder of modern archaeology. So,
well, that is kind of, in a way, when they're talking about this site, I was looking at news stories about the geologist who carried out work there with all that government funding, and he was given like a regiment of soldiers to help him from the Indonesian army, or at least some soldiers. Maybe a regiment is an exaggeration, but and the archaeologists, the only criticism that I could see from the archaeologists was just that they're damaging the site with their like enthusiasm, and I think that's what some people might not get. Is like, oh, there are chambers underneath. Why don't you just dig down into it? And the days of like archaeologists dynamiting pyramids to see what's underneath are kind of gone a little bit. Like,
yeah, and
like we may never find out. Yeah,
is we learned that there's a lot of information in all that soil, right, and all that structure. There's basically context from trash to making sure you can carbon date those layers. Is so much information there, and it sucks that it's slow sometimes, but we can't just get rid of it because we'll lose so much. We won't even know what we're losing, right? If you really want to know about the ancient past, we have to do things slow sometimes, which can be frustrating, but that's just what it has to be.
Archaeology is a destructive process. You are destroying a site when you excavate it. And there's a certain amount of knowledge that you're never going to get back because when you excavate it, you're losing stuff.
So it's a risk-benefit analysis, like anything, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And with this site, like to get to the chambers relative to where they are with the radio sensing, they might have to destroy a big portion of the site, which I don't know if they want it to be a tourist attraction. Also,
the most likely hypothesis is that these are not man-made chambers. Graham thinks that, but this is one thing they kind of say it, but they don't make it abundantly clear. This is a volcanic site. Yeah. So there's a tube coming up from the mantle with lava, and it makes holes in chambers. That's what volcanoes do, right? So the fact that there are spaces in there that aren't completely filled in, that's what you expect from volcanic sites. That's why there's volcanic rock flowing down the top of the thing. So you're like, wow, how can you explain that there's a hole in this volcano? And I'm just like, I don't know, man. You ever done like a first grade science experiment? You got a big hole in the middle of your volcano, don't you? That's like how a volcano works. So there's not any good reason really to believe there are man-made like holes in this thing.
How the way Hancock phrases it is that like in that part of the show, there are two people who are interviewed. There's the archaeologist who worked at the site, and there's a geologist who worked at the site who is also a believer in Atlantis, as an aside. He's published his own book on Atlantis.
Yeah, several people that he interviews, he says, oh, this scientist I'm going to talk to are people that go on tour with him and are like at similar cons and his friends and stuff. So.
Yeah, he is also a believer of that alternative story and thinks Atlantis was in Indonesia. But you can hear the difference in how they speak about these sites. Like the archaeologist said they dug down, and then he talks about the date that he gives, which was, I don't know, post.
It's like the first centuries, like BC and AD. Like it's in that time period is the traditional dating, I think.
And
also, if just to make sure, the Younger Dryas is basically a little ice age that happened about 12,000 years ago. So if anybody doesn't know what that term means, I know you guys do. I mean, the listeners.
Yeah, and the archaeologist, the way he talks about the dating, he talks about the date from the last cultural layer, which is, they could have dug down way deeper than that, and I'm sure they did, but what was the date of the soil that had actual human artifacts in it? And so that's how they date the site. Whereas what the geologist did is he drilled down with these huge cores, sometimes to the depth of 30 meters. I actually read his presentation on it, between like 15 and 30 meters. But this is a terraced hillside. And the point isn't like, what's the date of the dirt at the bottom of the drill? The point is, are there any human artifacts associated with that dirt?
I noticed the same exact thing, and I was like trying to explain that to my dad, like that just because it's like the hill itself is a certain age doesn't mean the artificial man-made site is the same age as the hill, like the lowest hill.
I guess the question is, does Graham know that? And if he does know that, why did he convey the information this way?
He definitely knows that.
So I think he knows that because that's a basic idea. That's law of superposition.
Well, I agree. I'm just saying. So I think there's two positions here. You could say Graham was just naive about that and he made a mistake, and it shouldn't have been worded that way. Or Graham is deliberately putting in misinformation to make things seem different than they are, even though he knows better. So
I think, based off of his like other stuff, I think he knows. There's other moments where he definitely knows things and he withholds it because he knows that it'll come off as wrong or bad or factually inaccurate. And then we'll get to that. Sorry, I interrupted you, Stefan.
No, it's I just got the show up now. The archaeologist dates it to 5,000 BC.
Okay.
So it is a super ancient site. That was the date of the last cultural layer that the archaeologist said.
I think Grant Hancock does this a lot, where he takes the lowest date at the site and then applies it to the whole site. And he does this with Cholula, later episodes, where the thing is, people inhabit locations for thousands of years and build directly on top of each other. So just because humans were living there doesn't mean they were building the biggest building that's there at that time. It's
sometimes it's not even the same culture.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like take my house, underneath my house, I don't know, there might have been a Native American site or something, I don't know, a wood fort or something like that, and it's saying that the evidence of the wood fort dates to 1400s, therefore the current apartment that is built on it is also from the 1400s. That's what he does, basically.
And if we can take any point of your house and line it up with any star or the sun, then we can prove that the people back then knew all the things that you know now, Trey.
Oh no, that's I guess we'll get into that. The astronomy stuff. He really, really loves the astronomy.
So the next major point of this is the flood myths, right?
Yes.
I got to say one more thing about
Gang.
I know this is going to be a 5-hour-long podcast, but
no, it's good. We've got a lot to talk about.
But he makes it seem that archaeologists reject the date of 25,000 years ago because we don't accept that hunter-gatherers are capable of building a site like that. And 25,000 years ago, definitely, from the point of archaeology, predates agriculture, predates urbanism, all these things. But no archaeologist would say that hunter-gatherers are incapable of creating megalithic structures. He has to say that that's our argument because, our actual reason for questioning 25,000 years ago is quite a good one. But if it does turn out that it truly dates to 25,000 years ago, archaeologists will gladly accept that it dates from that time period and that hunter-gatherers did it. And there are other, we'll come to a site, Göbekli Tepe, where Hancock concedes that it was built by hunter-gatherers, and I'm sure he hates conceding that. So the mainstream archaeological view,
he doesn't in his book, but he does now, apparently. So.
Yeah, I know. He's changed his tune a lot. I'd love to know how he rejects ideas. But,
what's his methodology, right?
Yeah. But, yeah.
Okay.
It's Hancock that thinks that these hunter-gatherers can't do shit. Archaeologists...
Yeah, because it's important to note that the mainstream archaeological opinion is that Göbekli Tepe was built 12,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers, right? So that's a mainstream opinion. So you can't take things sooner than that and be like, oh, how did hunter-gatherers build this? Because we already accept that they could. So.
There's definitely been a shift of like in accordance to like new evidence that like, yeah, now it's like mainstream accepts that like hunter-gatherers are capable of building monumental architecture, monumental structures with hunter-gatherer level societies. And stuff.
And when new compelling material evidence was brought in, the model changed its position.
Yeah. But Grant Hancock, I guess, hasn't. He's stuck in the 70s.
He has changed his position on some things. For example, his opinion on Atlantis was that it was moved by a geological process, which was hypothesized, which doesn't actually exist. He now accepts that it doesn't exist and doesn't use that opinion anymore. So he does change his opinion on some things, but I don't really I don't know how he does, what he bases it on. So I don't know.
Interesting.
Anyway, so let's get to the flood myths, right?
Yeah.
This is an essential part of his entire thesis, and it's the second major theme of this episode.
Yes.
I'm going to take a bite of my Euro. Why don't you talk?
Oh, I can talk about flood myths. I know a lot about flood myths. So like the thing is a lot of pseudo archaeology loves flood myths. For I guess for a reason, because there's young Earth creationists who love the flood myths like across. So the thing is in the narrative is that like cultures from all around the world, like we got Mesopotamia, they got like Indian flood myths, we got Chinese flood myths, like that. There a lot of cultures have different have a flood myth, like a myth where the world or a good portion of the world is flooded, and there's a group of survivors that survive on like a boat or something along those lines. And the narrative that pseudo archaeologists go for, like ancient aliens or young Earth creationists, they go that like, okay, because the flood myth is so prevalent, that means it must have happened, like an actual flood happened. It's a cultural memory of that event. It's a literal event that happened.
Yeah, the cultural memory hypothesis is really strong in all these kind of
Yeah, and it ignores. So Grant Hancock, that's his position, is that of flood. I don't think he believes in a global flood, right?
I think he has to. I think he must do.
He must. Okay.
So what he believes currently, and his thinking on this has changed from, because I said I've read his books from 1995 till present. A comet hit the Earth, and that's what caused this cataclysm that destroyed the old world, the old magicians and their world. It caused massive sea rising, which caused some areas to flood, and this climate change destroyed the foundation which these civilizations were built on. So that plus the flooding destroyed everything. It wasn't a global flood, like the whole world was flooded other than Mount Ararat.
He's not like extreme, right?
But it was a massive flooding event or flooding events over decades that caused basically the civilization to go through. Basically like the worst version of our current global warming climate model happening like all in the next 10 years. That's what he thinks happened.
Okay. And so, yeah, and his basis for that, at least a good portion of his basis for that, is these flood myths. And I was like trying to explain to my dad, because I watched this with my dad, and because I've put a lot of time into like researching these flood myths and looking at them individually. And there's a lot of nuance in it, and like this is what Grant Hancock does with myths. A lot of time he removes them from like their cultural context, and with a lot of these myths there's a lot of research that you need to go into, like, okay, when were these myths first written, who was recording them, like that kind of stuff, because there are like definitely similar myths. Like Mesopotamia does have very similar myths that resemble like the Noah's flood narrative and stuff. But when you move,
they are right next to each other, though.
Yeah, they share culture, they interact with each other. But when you go outward, Like the Chinese flood myth looks like nothing like the Noah's flood myth. Like it's a very, very different story with like the Yellow Emperor, like managing like floods, and it's over like generations and stuff. It's like the river flooding. And then the Indian flood myth is very different than the Nordic flood myth. And it just is like humans. I think it has to do with mainly that humans, like, we live near water most of the time, and floods happen, and people will develop stories about that.
And many of the Mesoamerican ones,
oh yes,
we have because they were told to a Catholic.
Right. That's the thing, is a lot of times it's Christian missionaries inserting the Noah's flood narrative into cultures.
And
colonization.
maybe he did it perfectly. Maybe he did it without bias, but he probably did it with bias. And also, he's probably not an expert in that culture and all their language, and he's trying his best to interpret the words into a way that makes sense to him, because that's how people act, you know. Yeah. And so if the story gets closer to the Noah version, that would make sense, you know. And we don't know the original story altogether, and that's definitely unfortunate. Like I said, archaeologists aren't saying we know everything. There's a lot of stuff we don't know, but we have to be careful on what we think we do know in our sources, and we can't just act like all these stories are the exact same, especially when somebody who, you know, comes from the Mesopotamia tradition of flood myths that lives in England or Spain at the time comes over to the New World and here's a flood myth, and then all of a sudden they sound the same. Well, you know, there's a reason for that.
Yeah, a lot of with a lot of this pseudo archaeology, they take myths very like accept them 100%. Don't look into like the background that goes into these, because myths change over time culturally, especially like cultures that don't have like a written language, and these myths are like nailed down, like written generation, because they can change when they're oral traditions really easily, and especially during colonization, when missionaries are like actively trying to like change the religions and mythologies of native peoples, like they insert details. Yeah.
You know, like to me, like, you know, I study story structure and motifs, right? That's like part of my discipline, and like the fact that you see similar motifs happen is not surprising at all, right? That's just Joseph Campbell. Like that's not anything that people who study this thing think would be strange, and isn't necessarily connected to real events. Although flooding is a pretty normative event, especially since people like to live near the water, you know?
Yeah. I mean, all of this, I mean, the reason they love flooding is because the only reason these stories exist is because of Plato's Atlantis.
Yeah.
And so for them, there has to be this one colossal flood, and every flood story to them has to be like an echo of this great flood, because without Plato's Atlantis, these ideas don't even exist. But
yeah, it's kind of a fundamental text to pseudo-archaeology, right?
Yeah, it's the Old Testament to pseudo-archaeology.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And, you know, to anybody who's not fairly vetted on this, we have Plato on the show, and Plato can tell us that it was all just a parable. You know, it wasn't actually talking about a real place, right, Plato?
Well, what's interesting about Plato's Atlantis is that he doesn't say it was a flood.
Your Atlantis, you mean?
Sorry, yes, my story, yes, which I wrote.
So eloquently put into words.
Yeah. When I wrote this story down, I believe I put that the island subsided because of an earthquake.
Oh, yes, you did.
Which is funny that it's been attached to this flood idea, probably because of Christianity and Noah and all of that. But Plato doesn't actually say it was a flood, I think.
Just an edit. I quickly went over Plato's notes just to make sure we got this part correct. And yes, Plato does in fact say that an earthquake caused it to sink after a long war that Athens led, and it became an impassable barrier of mud past the Pillars of Hercules, which of course is west of the Atlantic Ocean.
I think.
And also Atlantis is not like super technologically advanced, because Athens like defeats Atlantis in a war. Like Athens gets its ass kicked all the time by other Greek city states.
Yeah, well, you know, the gods were helping them. So.
Okay. That's true. It's allegedly.
Yeah. So you got the gods on your side. You got plot armor. So
Yeah.
helps you out. But yeah, so there's basically, we don't need to go into the whole Atlantis thing too in detail, but basically there was nobody publishing in any journal of any renown at all that thinks Atlantis was a real place. There is nobody that studies the Greeks that thinks so. There's nobody that studies stories that thinks so. It's basically completely a debunked idea that is only popular in sci-fi and pseudo archaeology. I think it's fair to say.
From what I understand, the whole point of Atlantis is like a metaphor. Like it's like the, I don't know, like this ideological city that it's like the prodigal son, like in the Bible, I guess for people. Like the prodigal son's not a real person. Like it's a metaphor. It's a parable. Yeah, it's not meant to be taken as like a literal.
Ancient Atlanta was more than just a delta hub. It was a vibrant metropolis, the equal of Paris or New York.
That's right, honey. Whatever you say.
Look at these fabulous ruins. Turner Field, the Coca-Cola bottling plant, the airport.
But tell us, how could a city with such a fabulous airport end up underwater?
Now that's a story that can only rightly be told in a Chamber of Commerce video narrated by folk rock troubadour Donovan.
Atlanta was a city, landlocked, hundreds of miles from the area we now call the Atlantic Ocean. Yet so desperate the city's desire for tourism that they moved offshore, becoming an island and an even bigger delta hub, until the city overdeveloped and it started to sink. Knowing their fate, the quality people ran away. Ted Turner, Hank Aaron, Jeff Foxworthy, the guy who invented Coca-Cola, the magician, and the other so-called gods of our legends. Though gods they were, and also Jane Fonda was there. The others chose to remain behind, on their porches with their rifles, and one day evolve into mermaids, and sing, and dance, and ring in the new.
Hail Atlanta!
And it's basically, look what these fuckers did. They thought they were tough shit, and then they fucked around and found out, and now they're dead for it. That's like kind of the point of the story.
Yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know, I am getting out of my depth here a little bit, but all of Plato's surviving texts that we have, and we probably have all of them, is probably one of the few classical philosophers who people think we actually have all of his texts, which is pretty interesting. Shout out to Plato. Shout out to me.
Plato!
Shout out to Plato for really getting that right and done, putting the hours in.
Hard worker, that guy.
Corrupt in the youth.
Yeah.
Plato!
Although, actually, maybe he didn't write any of them as Socrates did, but
Ooh.
I'm not sure. Anyway, but all of them are dialogues between two people. Every Plato text is a dialogue between two people. We don't actually even know what Plato thought about anything, really. I think
true,
it's fair to say.
He kind of devil advocates on some positions,
Yeah, all of these things are like designed as a conversation. Like these Greek students would sit down, listen to this conversation, and then they would debate philosophy. Like Plato's intent was not to record history with these things.
That's very true. That's a good point. So if you put it in that, I said a lot of these pseudo things are because people pick a part out and leave the context out of it. If you put into the context that Plato was a guy that told these little stories about things that happened so people could think of them like thought experiments, and then one of them tells the story of a hubris city that gets destroyed, it doesn't seem like, oh, that's a real place. But if you just hear, oh, that guy had big brains, he's from the ancient times, he talked about this place, where is it? Then you want to find it,
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to make a video this year on Plato, because when you learn more about him, when you see like his stories in context, it's like he's really like a teacher, just like setting up an exercise for his class. And it's like, who do you think was the bad guy in this scenario?
Yeah, because you're right that like most, like they just take the Atlantis story by itself. They don't look at the wider context of, I don't know, what the narrative's trying to say, like thematically and stuff like that.
And that conversational technique was popular for a long time after that. I mean, Concerning the Two Chief World Systems is written in that same way. So that was a long-standing technique of philosophy writing. So, Concerning the two chief world systems is Galileo's book.
It was,
but anyway, so do the fact that lots of people have stories about the water rising written at different times, a different culture, does that convince you, or you think lead credence to the idea that there was a global flood that destroyed a unknown civilization 12,000 years ago?
I say no. They're just, they're stories and stuff. And there's a lot of nuance
all the time, and whenever they happen, it's devastating for the people who live next to them. Now we can just go to another shop and get more food or whatever, and someone will come and fix our house for the most part. But like, imagine you're just a simple Neolithic farmer and a flood comes, your crops are dead, your house is gone, maybe loads of people are dead. Is really devastating. Like, your chances of starving to death have just skyrocketed.
Yeah, I mean,
like, these were serious threats to them. Serious threats.
Floods can be cataclysmic things, of course. I mean, 1 million people died in a flood in China a while ago. It doesn't get talked about a lot because it was in rural China, but it's a terrible loss of human life. And if that happened thousands of years ago, of course there'd be all kinds of literature about it. And even as bad as it was, killing that many people, like, the mythology would make it even worse, right? Because that's what you do in a story. Like, the main characters become better and the bad guys become worse, and that's just how we tell stories a lot of the time. So, like, you need to understand that when you're interpreting mythology.
And with, like, I know the Mesopotamian ones, like, there might be like a historical basis to, like, the flood myths there, where there is, like, archaeological evidence of, like, a major flood in Shuruppak. Like, it's a regional flood, but it was a very big regional flood. So, like, there's probably, like, historical basis, like, for the Chinese one. Like, who knows? Like, I don't know. Like, you're limited by the evidence that survives. It's definitely not like a global flood, or even like
there was no global flood. We know that for pretty certain, because there would be a sediment layer around the world, and there's not.
And also, there's not enough water to flood.
There's which is a big problem.
Meanwhile, everyone in Nepal is like, "What's a flood myth?"
Live on a mountain, you fools. Okay, so that's basically episode 1. He lays that out, and then episode 2, we go to South America.
No, we go to Latin America. We go to Central.
We go to. Sorry,
he does mention Peru at one point. So
he does. So. We go south of North America generally. Okay, so you want to take the lead on this one, my man? This is
this was my episode. I saw the title and I, like, looked at my dad. I was like, Dad, I know this stuff. I'm like an amateur expert on this stuff. I do a lot of reading. I know my Mesoamerican history. So Graham Hancock this time, he goes to Mexico. He goes to Mexico, and the focus is the Cholula Pyramid. Outside of Mexico City, and he talks to an archaeologist, like a real archaeologist, who works at the site, Jeffrey McCafferty, who's an archaeologist, and he had some choice things to say to, like, he was interviewed afterwards, and friends of him have spoken out about, like, how he was very heavily edited and manipulated to say things that and make it seem like he supported what Grant Hancock was saying. But that's another thing. Because Grant Hancock talks about the Cholula Pyramid, which is the largest pyramid in the world, by like width, by, like, I think like square area or something like that is the largest, because it's a very wide monument.
Yeah, it depends on how you count these things. Like, they do that even now for dams. Certain dams are deeper, bigger, filler. It's like, oh, this one's the biggest, this one's the biggest. But point is, it's really damn big.
It's a huge pyramid, and most of it now is under, like, a hill, because they built a church on top of it. And even, like, when the Spanish showed up, it was already in, like, a state of disrepair.
Yeah, when we say they, we mean the Spanish colonists.
Yes, the Spanish colonists,
the Catholics.
And like, over the centuries, people have, like, taken stones and used them to build churches and houses with the stone. So it's it's a fragmentary site, but it's still very, very impressive. And so Grant Hancock, he goes here and he talks to the guy, and, like, for them at first, like, it's pretty, I don't know, it's pretty fits with, like, the mainstream archaeology. But then like I don't know, he has like this tendency to go with like the oldest dates, right?
Yeah, he has a bias towards it because it fits his hypothesis.
So
he's looking for the evidence that conforms.
Yeah, because I was explaining like before, like to my dad that like in Mesoamerica, this is a tradition with a lot of Mesoamerican pyramid sites, is that they were built periodically, like over centuries, and stacked directly on top of each other.
Stacks on stacks on stacks.
Stacks on stacks on stacks, like the Temple Mayor, like in Mexico City itself, like it is like the succession of like 4 or 5 Aztec kings building directly on top of each other, and building bigger and bigger and bigger pyramids on top, directly on top of, using the foundations of the one beneath it. So like Grant Hancock does this, where he takes the Cholula pyramid as it is, like the greatest extent, like the biggest it ever got, and then he goes to the foundations of it and goes, okay, the foundations are this age, so therefore the entire complex is that age as well, which is not the case. There's evidence to like, this is all backed up by evidence where like it was built periodically over like centuries, and so
I thought he did sort of illustrate that it changed over centuries.
he did, but like he like kind of like ignores it, like he mentions it, I think. So this is where I'm getting into how I feel about like Grant Hancock. Like he says just enough to kind of cover his butt, but then he withholds details, or says it very fast to mislead the audience into believing that like the Great Pyramid Cholula, like as it looks with the CGI model that he brings up, is like how it looked like in its earliest state, like thousands of years ago. I don't know. That's just like his sleight of hand. I don't know. That might just be me picking up on that.
Well, it's funny is that he accepts all the archaeological information about it, but then he's just like, but it's a pyramid, maybe pyramids.
Yeah. So I said, I don't want to fully get into this yet, but he definitely believes the pyramid, its shape must matter. So when you see a pyramid, it's not just a structure. It's not just these people built a large pyramid before we thought they could. Wow, that's cool. There's a metaphysical component to it, right? Mm-hmm. So, and this metaphysical part of his hypothesis is very important to him, but he is kind of very coy about it when he's talking to the public at first. He definitely mentions it. It's not hidden. I'm not making it up. He'll talk about it, but he doesn't lead with it. So, like he even says in this episode, could we be witnessing the unfolding of an extraordinary master plan? Right. So so he's talking about this really large connected strategy of all these different civilizations that we have no evidence that they contacted each other, but he sees it in the building plans, using all this kind of like, you can call it sacred geometry or whatever, but the fact that the shapes and things have a spiritual component to them. So
yeah, because in this episode he brings up, like, he tries to link. This was where I was like, oh gosh, like he's really going for it. Where like he's like, okay, this looks like this is a pyramid, and it looks vaguely like the Giza pyramid, or like a pyramid in like I don't know where, like Southeast Asia, and he's like, therefore they're all connected, right? This is where he gets to that.
Yeah, and he mentions that they're all built on a sacred place, which is an important part of his hypothesis, I believe.
Yeah, which isn't
sacred springs.
Springs, yeah. And it's funny because he brings up like the Giza pyramid, like that's like a historical period. Like we have like surviving written documents from the people who built the pyramid, like a foreman, like his scroll like survives, like his diary. I don't know. It's weird for him to like bring that up, where we know like the people who built it themselves have told us what they thought and interpreted about the site.
There's not an episode about Egypt in this show, but he talks about Egypt a lot in his other work, of course.
Yeah, and in this episode, he talks about Texcoco, mm-hmm. Which is near the ancient site of Texcoco. Not even ancient. Yeah, that's the thing about the Aztecs; they're actually very, very recent. Which was like one of the main cities in the Triple Alliance, which is the Aztec Empire.
Oxford was built around the same time that the Aztecs were mucking about. People forget.
Yeah.
Can you imagine though? Yeah. Just as an aside, can you imagine? I would love to see like a Mexican guy come to Westminster Abbey.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I know the English say they built this, but is it a legacy? is it a legacy of something else?
It's crazy. Like, yeah, like with Texcoco, like I was literally like shocked that he thinks that this site is built by his ancient civilization, because Texcoco was built. We know the king that it was built under. It's Nezahualcóyotl. Like it's one of the Texcocan kings, like one of the last ones, who we have like illustrations and portraits of, and like his son survived to like the colonial era and like wrote things down. Like the thing is with like Aztec history and Aztec like buildings, like they're all historical. Like we had like the people who observed their construction and stuff were still like alive and like wrote these histories down.
They called themselves the Mexteca, didn't they?
Yeah, the Mexica is there's like I could get into like the like Texcoco I don't think would consider themselves Mexica.
Well, we just have what they called themselves.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, like I guess like there's a lot of debate like around like Mesoamerican like people like about what to call like Aztecs. Aztecs is a misleading word. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't mean to grill you. I'm sorry. I was just remembering that that's not what they call themselves.
Like Texcocans would probably call themselves Texcocans. Anyways, that's the thing is like around the lake there were so many different cultures and very distinct ethnic groups and stuff. Anyways. Mm-hmm. Texcoco is not like an ancient site by any means. It is like 1400s. And we know the king that it was built under and why he built it. It was like his pleasure gardens. And for them to suggest, and the guy that they brought up for this is Marco Vitagato, who is a literal white supremacist. Like let's not mince words here.
There's an undercurrent in some of that in the stuff. I think we can kind of save that to the conclusion of this, but it is there. It is something that does exist. So
so this guy that Graham Hancock visits when he or interviews when he's at Texcoco, he wrote a book called The Empires of Atlantis, which is literally just white supremacist propaganda. Like
oh good.
He believes like the Aryans descend from white Atlanteans,
which is what the Nazis themselves believed, and spent money looking to find and prove. That's documented history. So.
That is true. Yes. Yeah. There's a whole history to a lot of this stuff that Graham Hancock ignores. And when he interviews this guy, he interviews him directly, like the flow from the actual archaeologist Jeffrey to this guy is so like smooth and seamless. And this guy's a hack. This guy's just he has no qualifications.
Yeah,
he's a white supremacist.
If Graham is legitimate, that doesn't mean this other guy's legitimate. Graham could be for real. This other guy could be full of shit. This other guy's just out there, another level past where we think Graham is. So
right, yeah, and this guy's like an ancient aliens guy, you know.
Yeah, like, which Graham Hancock is not. Just to be sure to everybody, as far as we know, and he has said he does not believe that aliens caused this. He believes that basically a shamanistic society a long time ago was the foundations for this, not aliens.
Yes.
Well, he did write a book, The Mars Mystery.
The Mars Mystery, yeah.
I think he has changed his tune on Ancient Aliens. And again, I would love to know how Hancock decides to like exclude an idea. But I think if Hancock was defending himself here whilst we're talking about Mexico, he would say, yeah, I know that's a historical site and stuff like that, but is the fact that it was built over a spring and that the pyramids were built over a spring a legacy of some lost belief that both these cultures inherited from Atlantis? And there's really nothing you can sort of say against that. It's like you can believe that if you want to believe that. But humans need water every single day or we're going to die. Mm. And so it's no surprise that people like springs and that they considered springs
pretty good
of special treatment. Yeah, because if they weren't right by them, they're going to drop dead tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
you're saying the scientists have a explanation for why cultures show this link to liking water?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Because Atlantis was an island.
Yeah. So that's why. That's where it all comes from. Yeah. That or the aquatic ape theory, of course.
Oh no!
Yeah.
No!
Oh no!
Oh no! The stoner ape theory? What are some of the other ones?
Yeah, we can only do one rabbit hole at a time. This is good.
Also in this episode, he talks about Quetzalcoatlus.
Yes. So Quetzalcoatl, of course, Quetzalcoatl is a very Quetzalcoatl is
it's the pterosaur. I didn't mix my wires
that's a dinosaur.
across.
I guess he's not a dinosaur, but he's. Anyways, so the Quetzalcoatl mythology is a big, important cultural point in Mesoamerica, and it is also something that a lot of pseudo-archaeologists like to address on. And one of the major reasons why is there's different versions of the story, but a lot of the times Quetzalcoatl comes up and he's basically like a wise sage, like Abraham, kind of like a figure that comes in when things weren't going good and helped. He uses the word civilized, that word. Yes. I think can be a useful word, but it also has a lot of connotation from colonialism. So, he's basically a person imparting knowledge, practical knowledge, knowledge of, both the universe and how to build a better society. You can define it how you want. But so he sees that as evidence that Quetzalcoatl is one of these magicians from this society that was destroyed in the Younger Dryas.
Yeah, he quotes the story about Quetzalcoatl crossing the ocean or showing up on the shores of Mexico, and
a boat with no paddles.
Pulled by snakes. And then he leaves. He departs because of Huitzilopochtli, and then he says, "I'm coming back. I'll come back someday."
Just like Jesus.
And then also Grant Hancock likes to stress that he is a heavily bearded individual.
So in his book that I read, he mentions that he was white.
Oh, he removed the white part.
He has specifically said that before, and brought it up as important. Now, some people say that that's extremely racist, and you could definitely say that. I'm not even saying I disagree. I'm just saying the other point is the point of the skin difference, meaning he's from just a different culture. Right. And so to say, oh, look, he is not of these Mesoamerican people because he's from these other people that were the older society. Right. So that's what somebody who would say, well, it's not racist would probably say. But, it's getting pretty sticky for me, I'd say.
The origins of that are racist. The thing is it's a racist talking point that he's like tried to shave down and neuter to make it sound more.
Come from? I don't know, actually. Where does the idea that
it comes from the colonial era? So the version of the Quetzalcoatl story that he quotes about him showing up and then disappearing over the horizon, that's a colonial era myth. That's an invention.
Okay, so that's because there's many versions of this story. There's not just one.
There's a different version where Quetzalcoatl, and this is probably the original, but we can get into debates about that, where his heart is taken out and then it flies up into the sky and becomes a star. I think it becomes Venus. That's what Quetzalcoatl is identified with.
Good for him.
And so there's a different version of it. And this is a colonial era myth that was, it's pretty clear that it was invented by the missionaries and Catholics and Spaniards to justify their return, to justify their colonization of Mexico. Like they're like, oh, we were fulfilling your prophecy. Because we have beards and we're white and and we match the description of your thing, of your god. So therefore, we are your gods, and you should follow our orders and pay tribute to our kings and taxation and stuff. And we're better than you. And this story originates from that period, and there's no evidence that it existed before that. So this is where I'm talking about where Grant Hancock removes the context of the story. Like it technically is a native story, but it's a native story that was invented post-colonial era and during colonial era, and obviously
think of it like a reboot, right? Like they've remade King Kong several times, and many of the motifs of King Kong are there, but each generation puts its own swing on the story.
Right?
So it's like a colonialist reboot of the Quetzalcoatl story. So it's not fake, but it is a different version of it in this time period with the things that mattered in history at that time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the thing is, we know that a lot of Mesoamerican history was rewritten during the colonial era to make certain people more demonized, certain people more glorified, like Nezahualcóyotl, like the guy who commissioned Texcoco. He in the history written by his grandson. he is like, oh, I knew that the Christian God was going to show up, so I built a temple to the Christian God and forbid human sacrifice and killed homosexuals and all kinds of, and made all these laws that resemble the Ten Commandments. And it's like obvious that that's not what actually happened.
Yeah.
And it was an invented thing to make him more like to adjust to the colonial era, to adjust to the Christianization. Like, oh, we want to still praise our ancestors, so we're going to make them like, they're basically like noble pagans.
Now, if you believe in Graham Hancock's hypothesis or interested in it, you may say, well, sure, some of these things may not be true. Graham's talking about a whole bunch of stuff. He's building a giant case. So yeah, a couple of them might not be true, and he's changed his opinion on a couple things. But the thing is, the majority of his hypothesis, if not altogether the whole thing, is based on these kind of conjectures. He's linking, well, this looks kind of like this sounds kind of like this, maybe all these things wind up. So as you start punching holes in some of the major ones, if this is a big interlocking chain link to get to the final hypothesis, well, the chain's starting to fall apart, right? Because the Quetzalcoatl story is important because it literally is what he wants. It's this person. Now, it's a god in the story, but he's trying to say...
So I've been so enthralled by this because I don't actually know much about Mesoamerican symbolism or religion. But this is just an absolutely random aside, but some Mormons believe that Quetzalcoatl may have been the returning Jesus.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that's one version where it's Jesus crossing the ocean. Jesus or one of the apostles crossing the ocean is a narrative I've seen floated about. Oh, by the way, people, Native Americans can grow beards. This is an old like racist thing that was like invented where like, oh, like Quetzalcoatl had a beard, so therefore he couldn't have been Native American. He was a white guy or old.
There's a lot of different people that are, you can say native, depends on time scale, but people who've lived in the Americas for the last 20, 30,000 years, different groups of those people could grow beards,
Yeah.
So.
Montezuma, like Moctezuma, like the famous Aztec king, he had a beard. He grew a beard. Like in Aztec society, like a beard was reserved for like the elite and nobles and stuff. So everybody else had to shave. Among other things.
Another point that he brings up in relation to this, and he brings up quite a bit in his book, is that like archaeologists and anthropologists are very starting to change their minds about things, and brings up the Clovis first hypothesis as kind of like a central exhibit to that claim, right? And so like I wrote a book about the Clovis, and it's something I studied a lot. There's a reason. Basically, the Clovis first hypothesis is that the first people to come into Americas were the Clovis culture. We call them that because we have a particular spear arrowhead point that they designed, a really good working one. And we find it up and down the West Coast. And so we're like, all right, that's a clear sign of culture because all these people making the same arrowhead show up at this one point. We date those arrowheads to the same time when the big old ice sheets that would have been between Russia and Alaska basically are at their lowest, right? So like, people can only come so much. People aren't jumping over the giant ice sheets. So like, hey, this makes sense, right? It tracks. And when people started to find little pieces of evidence that, hey, maybe people were here before that, then people are like, well, that's nonsense, man, because how are they getting by the ice sheets? There's just no way. So like, first of all, it wasn't just dogma. Nobody could think of a practical explanation for how people were getting across the strait. Okay, so the Clovis first paradigm started to fall apart as we found more like kind of irrefutable evidence that there were possibly several migrations at different times into the Americas. And yeah, there was pushback for quite a while, and some people were derided for their stuff. Even after the Clovis first paradigm fell, the scientists who found discoveries at the what is called the Bluefish Cave in Alaska,
or Yukon territory. Potentially back close on the border between those two.
Yeah,
in that region.
So they found evidence there, and that was derided for a while. And so like, yeah, it's true. If you find paradigm breaking stuff which doesn't seem to logically fit, there can be some pushback, and sometimes that pushback is too much. He's not entirely wrong about that. There is a history in science of people being too rigid, but the thing is, eventually, because the scientific method itself works, if you have the goods, your hypothesis is going to win out, right? Like there's a site with a bunch of like peat moss and stuff that was really soft, and eventually they dug down in it and they found stuff that was pre-Clovis, like really good artifacts. And they brought a lot of the Clovis first experts in there, and they looked at it and they came out and said, yeah, we were wrong. That's the result. Like, because science does deliver the goods. And Graham Hancock takes this to say, well, they don't like me and my ideas, and they will never do so. And look at these other people who were wrong that were turned right. Well, the thing is, those people presented their stuff scientifically to scientists. Graham has been doing this since the 90s. If he really thought he was onto something, he could have gone to school and got a damn degree, learned to publish this, use the millions of dollars he has made to actually publish his findings, but he does not do so. He continues to make for-profit, public-facing content and then say that he's the victim while he makes millions of dollars.
Those damn archaeologists.
Yeah.
Well, I hate, what I really dislike is how much he demonizes archaeologists, but also uses like the words like "we discovered" and this, and then also like accepts like some mainstream archaeology stuff, but then because in, I guess this is a later episode, he has footage of like actual archaeologists at work at, I think it's Poverty Point, and he's showing like, it's like B-roll footage of like the archaeologists just at work screening, doing all kinds of stuff. And then the whole time he's like, these archaeologists hate outsiders. They like are ignorant and like ignore data and are terrible. Like he's basically like just saying all these things that are not true and like mean, over footage of these archaeologists like who agreed to be filmed by him and agreed to be on his show. Like explicitly disproving his point, but he like, I don't know, he has this narrative that he likes to whine about.
Well, he has to, because the other conclusion is that
he's wrong.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking up the thing that most annoyed me most about the Clovis First, and this was from his book. Well, he just says in his book America Before how C. Vance Haynes, who was the guy whose paper was the first, like, hey, maybe the Clovis are the first here. He writes how, he'd used his influence and position to dismiss absolutely everything, blah, blah, blah. And there's a little footnote next to it, 43. And then, so you go to the back and you see what footnote 43 it says. And then it says, blah, 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 50 studies were dismissed. It is important to add, however, that Haynes' dismissals were often entirely justified.
Yeah.
So it's in the public face, it's like, I truly think he's like an evangelist for his religion. Sorry. Like the public facing opinion is so bombastic. Oh, fucking Clovis First, these archaeologists, blah, blah, blah. They're just throwing it out because they don't agree with it. And then in the back, tucked away in the back of the book, he's like, well, obviously a lot of these dismissals were entirely valid.
Yeah, right.
And I don't respect that.
Because, we find sites today that, like, say, like, oh, those mammoth bones were cut 100,000 years ago in North America, but they were bullshit, And it's like that people aren't saying they're bullshit for no reason because of dogma. It's because a lot of them aren't real.
It also frustrates me because he gives like disingenuous portrayals of archaeologists. Like it's in episode 3, like I guess the next one.
We can move on to Malta.
He's like overnight they built this. Suddenly they did this, and it's like that's not what the archaeologists say at all. It's disingenuous.
So his opinion basically is like the archaeologists don't know how a lot of these sites came to be. And then he continuously says it in his book, and he says it 4 different times in the show. He says, like, they just woke up and decided to build this, And it's like, why are you talking like that? Why are you being so hyperbolic? If you want people to take you seriously, like, if he's right, and he wants to be taken seriously, he needs to act more serious. Like, he comes off very petulant in this, like he's annoyed that people don't take him seriously. But how can we? If he doesn't want to do science or fund science, and he wants to talk like that, well, then scientists aren't probably going to take you seriously, man. You know, like I don't know. I don't know what he wants.
He's almost certainly a millionaire as well. If anyone's like, he doesn't have enough to fund an excavation, I bet he does. Well,
what's his net wealth? Let me see here.
Those net wealth things, I'm not sure how they get those.
Well, they're not that accurate. I'm gonna just ballpark.
If he's a famous book and he has like a Netflix, like this Netflix show is probably a multi-million-dollar deal or something like that.
They're putting him at 2 million net worth. So
okay.
I'm sure I actually think he probably has more.
Like anybody is allowed to like show up to like an archaeological site. Like if like you go through the like I don't know, you talk to people, like like you just talk to them.
Yeah, and, just be respectful.
Be respectful and don't call them like paranoid outside, like people afraid of outsiders and then ignorant. Like I don't know, just don't do that.
so the thing is, let's go to episode 3.
Yeah, episode 3.
So episode 3, we go to Malta. Where is Malta, Trey?
It's off the coast of Sicily, right? Near Italy.
It's in Roman lands.
It's in Roman lands. It's a nice island, beautiful island. Used to have dwarf elephants on it.
Hell yeah, it did.
Yeah, and I guess this goes into it because there's theories, and who knows how like basis they are, like where ancient Greeks and Italians like who were on the island saw the skulls and created myths around the skulls about like cyclopses.
Yeah. So those are stories that might be true, but it's a cool hypothesis. And see, it's a hypothesis that we don't know is true, and it might not be true, but we still think it's cool, and we don't think it's ridiculous because it makes a single simple claim. We don't think everything we can't prove is necessarily wrong. We just, if you have a really big, complicated hypothesis, we're going to need a lot of evidence is all. Graham.
Yeah, and so on this site, there's a lot of ancient temples, like these very, very like megalithic sites, like with these big stone blocks and all that.
Really awesome site, right?
Really awesome site. What's the big one called?
Gigantea
is the one that Grant Hancock focuses on, I think, the most. I think it's like the biggest one, and yeah, it's a big site.
It's the Neolithic period, is pre-Bronze Age. I think they're all sort of before 3000 BC.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I found this episode to be a bit boring, honestly. I kind of dozed out on it a bit.
This is the episode where he really, really loves the astronomy stuff. Like really focusing.
I find that to be the least compelling of all the arguments.
Yeah.
So basically,
I got a lot to say about that woman in astronomy, but we'll get into it.
Yeah. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so basically, the setup here, we go to this this island, Malta, really awesome site. Big stone structures. We're talking about 3,000 years ago, right? 4,000 years ago. There isn't that much known about the people who made it, so it is something we're studying. It's something archaeologists say we don't know, we want to know, we want to study, right? So it's not just arrogance. But he looks at the site, and the thing that he finds most interesting about it is astrological connections, right?
Yeah, alleged ones, like possible ones.
Yeah, so things that he thinks are. You want to talk about that, Plato?
Yeah, so, I mean, the thing is with Malta, it is an island, and it has been for a very long time. And the good thing about islands is that when new people do arrive, it does kind of change things up a bit. And so the reason all of these temples and assigned to the Neolithic period is because that's when people rocked up, farmers rocked up, and they have all sorts of things with them that's immediately identifiable in the archaeological record, like wheat and goats and things that weren't there before. So these, and there are also like radiocarbonates to confirm that these things are Neolithic too. But he seems to put the emphasis that it is all just on the fact that there is Neolithic material culture found in these temples. But he does the classic thing that he's always does, and he goes, but what if they're older? With no real evidence, but just what if they're older? And
his evidence is look at the stars, basically.
Well, his evidence is also the teeth, right? The 2 teeth.
Yeah, but those are Neanderthal teeth, were they not?
Right. I didn't understand where the jump was there. Like if like, and again, the teeth are like, there's debate on that if the teeth are actually from that lair that they were claimed to be, because it's like 1919 when they were discovered, and
Yeah.
they didn't have the best methods yet. I don't mean to be dismissive, but it's a possibility that it was misstated. But anyways, even if there are authentic, like that's Neanderthals on the site, like that doesn't mean that Homo sapiens were there. And it also doesn't mean that the structures are that age as well.
No, not at all. I think his point with it was really odd, that whole Neanderthal bit, when he was like, anthropologists refuse to accept that Neanderthals were on Malta, like even when Malta wasn't an island and the sea levels were lower and it was connected to Sicily. And it's like, no, when it was connected to Europe, no archaeologist, anthropologist would die on the hill that there were no Neanderthals on there. Why would they?
It's a reasonable hypothesis, right? Like, it's like, they fuck around there. Sure, why not?
Yeah, and even when it was an island, we know like Neanderthals were probably in Crete, and Crete was still an island even in the Ice Age.
Yeah.
So even if there was still a stretch of water between Malta and Italy, people would still accept like Neanderthals were there. But this is the whole. An archaeologist would probably say like, "Oh, maybe Neanderthals were there, but I don't know. We don't have evidence of it."
Yeah,
and
that's how
Hancock
talk.
and then Hancock takes that as them being adamantly refused to accept that Neanderthals are in Malta, and it's like, well, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, probably were when it was all one landmass, but what's the evidence? And he dismisses that. But so I think his whole point with the Neanderthals is like, look, they won't accept that, they just can't accept when a new paradigm comes in and blah blah blah. But honestly, no, like I studied prehistory at uni, like Paleolithic, Neolithic. No, I know a lot of archaeologists. Literally no one is going to be like, there were no Neanderthals on Malta.
Yeah, I was watching with my friend, and my friend was like,
to die on.
My friend was like, why did they bring that up, Miles? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't know what he's trying to convince people of with that. It just seems like a non sequitur. I don't really get it.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah.
I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding sometimes of like this is the science or skeptic perspective of like, oh, we don't think that that's true, and they think that that's arrogant, like, oh, you think you know better. But like the science or the skeptic position isn't that we know everything. It's that we know certain methods give pretty darn reliable results, and we tend to trust things as being true if they're used, if that information comes from those results. And if you say you know something and it doesn't come from those results, we naturally don't believe it, not disbelieve it, not say it's not true or can't be true, but it's just not, we're not going to take it into like, oh, that's wisdom, that's true. But they think that is like, it's dismissing it out of hand. But really we're like, well, try to use the methods and then maybe we'll pay attention to it. But they never want to, because I think they know that it won't work.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know. And then, as you said, there's like an astrological or astronomical, either way.
I hate this part, so I'll let you talk about it, because I don't want to talk about it.
So, well, the part that confused me, so there are multiple temples across Malta.
Yeah.
All from this Neolithic period. As far as I'm concerned, reliably dated. But could change. Who knows? What's the evidence, Hancock? But pretty much well dated to the Neolithic. They built these temples. And I think Gigantia was aligned to the star Sirius, but they all are sort of like at slightly different orientations. And
okay, so one of the people that Grandhawk, I did the same thing. Grandhawk.
Just call him GH.
GH interviews in this episode. She is from Heritage Malta. She's like a curator at one of the temple sites, I think. And she had some choice things to say in like a Facebook post about her appearance on the episode and how she was portrayed. She said, I was very heavily edited and quoted out of context to support the points that Graham Hancock gave. And she's like, I'm amazed how media prioritize what is said by foreign experts at the expense of ignoring local archaeologists and curators. Not all marketing is good marketing. I don't want to say that I told you so, but I told you so. So, yeah.
Well, probably her boss was like, "No, you got to do it."
Yeah, you got to talk because I think she was talking about how like she totally disagreed with like Grant Hancock saying that the age of the site was way older than what he was claiming or what is agreed upon between like the evidence. Yeah, this was Kayla Stroud. Was the curator.
It's amazing to me how, I don't know if people like these organizations didn't research Graham Hancock, or Netflix just walks around with such a big checkbook that their upper managers are like, no, you've just got to do it. Sorry.
A lot of working scientists don't really get trained in the things that like people interested in like skepticism do. And they don't really know how to embrace pseudosciences. They're not really, they just think, oh, that's not worth my time. And so they get tricked by it, or they don't really know how to interact with them. Stephen Novella from the Skeptic's Guide talks about this a lot. He's had a hard time trying to get his colleagues to learn how to do it appropriately. So it's an interdisciplinary failure across the sciences to deal with pseudo versions of themselves. So
that's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter that Heritage Malta disagrees with Graham Hancock, because he then called up Lenny Riedijk.
Oh, yes.
Lenny Riedijk. I'm sure I've offended absolutely everyone in the Netherlands with that pronunciation. But...
Shout out to our Netherlands listeners.
Is she the iPad lady?
Yeah, this is iPad lady.
Yeah, baby.
So it doesn't matter that, you know, all these temples suddenly appear with the arrival of like Neolithic animals.
Mm-hmm.
And people
in genetics, because genetics is a big thing in Europe about tracking migrations.
I was gonna say that point.
Well, you're right, Hancock never talks about DNA because there's no DNA evidence of his civilization.
It's kind of a trump card, I think, that kills the whole thing. So I was kind of waiting for it. You know, I think it's kind of the silver bullet. But
yeah. But anyway, Lenny, she's wondering. All these temples are at different orientations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as an archaeologist, you might say, well, they're pointing at different things then. You know, they're not all pointed at the star Sirius, which is what one of the temples definitely was. And so she had this system where you can sort of peel back the night sky back through time, because obviously as the Earth goes through space, it's not flying super smooth, it's wobbling. And the stars, not only are they like rising and setting, but they're also moving throughout the sky, with possibly the exception of the North Star. I don't know. And so she was just winding the clock back, and at different points, obviously, the star Sirius lines up with the different orientations of these different temples. And what I wonder about that, and I wish I could ask her, is that she said the change is very small. It changes 1 degree in the sky every 72 years. So basically in one person's lifetime, it's just going to move like the tiniest smidge. And so if it's moving so slightly, is it not just covering the whole of Malta? And that like at any point, if you're to have this totally open mind where it's like these temples could date from any time period, and you just keep rewinding and rewinding and rewinding and rewinding, at some point, as that star is just moving 1 degree across Malta, isn't it going to line up with absolutely everything?
Well, yeah. So this is a great example of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, right? They're basically taking the target, which is a star. They draw a line from the star to a point, say any point on Malta, they pick a point, it hits that point, and they go, this lines up perfectly, you know. And if they don't like the point, they say, let's spin the dial back 1,000 years. Now it lines up at this point. This point is a more interesting hit, so we'll count this as when it was built. But they don't have a good reason to say this is when it was built. They just like where it lines up then, so that's what they say. So they build a version of when things were constructed based upon where they line up with the stars, even though that's only one thing of evidence, and you need to correspond that with the geography, the geology at the site. But they choose not to do that. And I think it makes this line of evidence irrelevant, and I found it boring and uninteresting personally.
Yeah. No, and here's the thing: it's like even if like they lined up to like a star or something, because he gets really hung up on this in other episodes as well.
He loves them stars.
The meridian, it's lined up to the polar North Star and stuff like that. And like, I to be honest, I don't find it that unique or impressive. Like,
no, it just was it's just boring to me. I'm like, okay.
Ancient peoples had like nothing to do but observe and like measure the stars.
You literally got no Twitter.
They had,
we will know what that's like in a few weeks.
We will.
But right now, it's hard to imagine.
They had like many cultures had like priests where like their only job was to do that. Like their only job was they had infinite time just to look up at the stars, make observations, and then like record them and calculate things. Everybody, like pretty much all ancient peoples had astronomers in them. And it took a lot of like time and planning and patience, but it's like not magic.
So to make a modern analogy to this, the reason why like Star Trek nerds got so well known for knowing every like annoying bit of minutia and data about the show is there's 2.5 seasons of this show for 15 years, and it was the only show of its kind. And so the people that liked it continuously rewatched it over and over again. Yes. So people knew more about the first Star Trek show than basically any show ever since, and created the whole culture of let's know a lot about a show, right? It's because of how they interacted with it. So imagine people without TV, and now imagine the sky, and then add thousands of years of that. It's a pretty like easy thing to understand if you look at it in that context.
That is a really good, like, that is a great comparison, because like I know my
that's why they keep me around.
Wars background characters, or like my like Game of
Thrones. You know the dorky Star Wars background characters.
I do.
Whenever there's a dorky one, Trey's like, that's my boy.
Like who are the guys that are over the Sarlacc pit? Like Clocto, Octo. Oh, people are gonna criticize me for it.
Yeah, most of them are Weequay.
Yes,
is the species. Yeah.
Or like Jabba's palace, like I know what's the elephant guy, Max Rebo, Fly Snoodles, like I know that. and here, like a great example, like for like, and this is ancient, like this is 2,000 years ago. Like if people want to see like a really impressive like thing with astronomy, like the Horologium of Augustus, like in Rome, it's 2,000 years ago, not a modern recreation. It's an ancient thing that was created without computers or anything like that, and we know this because it's from a historical period. Like it's this amazing like obelisk that's structured in a way that like it gives like the calendar date based on the shadow that's cast by it. And it's this massive site. There's like not much of it left, but like that's like an ancient thing, and that's just people had a lot of time on their hand and a lot of like money and expenses and people just to do stuff. And that's, I don't know, Graham Hancock, like I don't think he understands that. Like people. Yeah.
If the Greeks do something with the stars, nobody thinks it's amazing. But if someone from somewhere else in the world does, all of a sudden, wow, how can you explain it?
Right. Like that's the thing is like you don't see him complaining about the Horologium Augustus. Like
that's what I'm saying.
Like,
so like,
that's built by the Romans, no doubt, and that's like 2,000 years younger than like an Aztec like temple that's built on a meridian.
And look, I don't think anybody's served by calling the entirety of all these ideas just racist on their face. Because a lot of people are interested in these for completely different reasons. And I'm just saying that, like, it is weird that, like, if the Greeks did it, it's not worth mentioning. But if someone else does it around the same time period, it's like, oh, wow. Like, it's just kind of weird. And like, it makes me a little uncomfortable, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised to see Malta in there, actually. I haven't read Fingerprints of the Gods, but...
I have. It's not fun. Don't read it.
Oh, was Malta in there?
I read all 3 of these books in 5 days. I don't remember exactly.
Oh my God, Miles.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I know.
People nowadays have too much time on their hands, man. You'll know all the minutia, You'll be like ancient.
I know way too much about which is why I feel comfortable with my intro. I think there's a hidden part to his hypothesis that he spreads out so people don't get it.
There is no question that the Graham Hancock you see on Netflix is not the Graham Hancock you see if you cornered him after like 10 pints in the pub.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
He's for sure telling you it came from Mars. Like, no doubt about it.
And so he says that... Yeah, say what you're going to say, sorry.
No, I was just surprised to see Malta because I'd seen interviews with him before talking about Göbekli Tepe and comparing it to Stonehenge. And when
he does that often.
Yeah, and when he was talking about Stonehenge, he was like, we understand well the Neolithic culture that it comes from. and blah 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 blah. Like, he totally accepts everything about Stonehenge and the Neolithic builders that did it. And so I was so surprised to see him pick on another European Neolithic construction. Like, the Neolithic people in Europe, they're all in on moving big rocks. They love to do that shit.
Dragged it 36 miles from Wales.
Yeah, from Britain to France, like Spain, Portugal. There's this whole like culture along the coastline of Europe where they were like, we got to move those big rocks. So I was really surprised to knowing that he accepted that. I was so surprised to see him pick on Malta. I don't know why.
He says a few lines in here which go to what I think his greater hypothesis is. He says, for one of the main reasons for his theory is that he dislikes the idea of the 21st century as the pinnacle of human achievement. Right. So like he has this kind of like
pet peeve or
this Walden style philosophy almost, like insulting the hubris of man, which, we can be kind of arrogant. So I get it. But like he believes that there is a sacred, important, higher knowledge or higher way of being that was lost in the past. And he also says things like, if the truth is allowed to come out, which is, I think, a little bit of inflammatory wording there.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And with the Malta, because he brings up that myth, right, about the giant woman.
Yeah, who built it for her son and stuff.
Yeah, like he just ignores details about the story. He's like, oh yeah, she wasn't actually a giant though. Like let's ignore it. Like he with a lot of these myths, like he ignores the details that don't fit his narrative, and then takes the ones that like, oh, that fits what I think. Like like they really meant that she was an intellectual giant. That's what he says.
So,
right? Wordplay.
Or she's like just larger than life kind of person,
Yeah.
But like this is the exact same phenomenon we see with the Bigfoot stuff we have to deal with, Trey, right? Where they take the stories and they basically, when they want to get us, the materialist scientist bros, interested, they leave out a bunch of stuff that they believe in.
Yeah. Because because I'm again, like this goes back to like his belief that there is a sophisticated advanced civilization in the past. Like, how sophisticated are we talking about? Why do we need them? Like what do they have that the Neolithic people didn't have?
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
So episode 4 is Bimini Rocks. I think we can skip this pretty quick. Bimini Rocks has about 120,000 different specials on History Channel Discovery the past 25 years. When I was a kid, they talked about them all the time. It is a natural occurring geological rock formation that has been shown to be that by every single field that has looked at them. But people say they kind of look like a roadway, which they do kind of look like that a bit. And they say, well, it's a roadway to Atlantis, even though Atlantis wasn't supposed to be there. Then he says, well, maybe there was an island there because there's an island there in an old map. But the old map is wrong because it's old and stupid. And we have geology
drawing mountains on that Piri Reis map. When they showed the island, the Bahamas, and he was like, is this the Bahamas? And is this the Bimini Rocks? It's like, and he was like, they're not mountains. He was very quick to say, like, they're not mountains.
They're fucking mountains, right?
Yeah, obviously the conclusion is like, that guy's drawn some mountains on that island.
Well, and like if you look at it from like an art perspective, like you have like a degree in art, you can clearly see that he uses similar styles to depict mountains in other places. So like, I don't understand what the fuck he's talking about, like I found this episode to be redundant. If you're a fan of Graham Hancock and wondering, well, why are we skipping over this? This has just been beat to death a million times. And honestly, it's not going to get you anywhere. Like this is a geological formation. If you don't believe me, go look it up. People with expertise can explain what happened. Look, it does look a little bit like a roadway. I get why you think that. Like you're not wrong, but like sometimes geological stuff but it doesn't mean that it is. Like if I saw it as a layman and I was scuba diving, no one brought it up, I'd be like, that's a structure built by humans. That is what I would think. I don't think people are stupid for thinking that. But the people who all they do is study rocks because they're fucking nerds, they're rock nerds, they go out there and look at it and they're like, no, this is a natural phenomenon, this is how it happened, this is our paper, we measured it, looked at it, all this shit, nobody can prove it wrong, everyone who looked at it has to agree, they come to the same conclusion, and that's what it is, get over it.
I thought it was really funny when they were like, geologists say it's just simple beach rock, and it cut to an image of a beach rock. And in my head, I was like, shit, that does kind of look like the Bimini Rocks, man. Like,
yeah.
Like,
if you think rocks like this could do that, you're like, oh yeah, now that you show me,
like, just showing me a comparison, it looks kind of similar, man.
Yeah. I mean, like, dude, they've literally been showing specials on this. Like, I just remember in the 90s watching on cable television on my fucking like 24-inch TV in my room, you know, the like Bimini Rock specials on Discovery Channel and stuff. It's just like so old, and just nothing has ever came of it. It's like, I just don't know why he brought it up. It's just find something new, man.
It's like remember that Yellowbick Road at the bottom of the ocean? That was the thing like a year ago or something. Yeah,
that was. Did you do that one? You know,
it's just like, just because something looks like something doesn't, on the surface, you know, like a cursory look, doesn't mean that it is. And I think that's Graham Hancock needs to learn that. I don't know, like, you know.
Well, trim the fat in your hypothesis. Focus on your best arguments. The couple things that you think are the strangest or weirdest that seem out of place. Because first of all, there are artifacts and there are sites that seem out of place or unexplored in history. In fact, that's one of the main things we talk about on this podcast is weird stuff in history, right? So like, you can be interested in it and love this stuff and really want to know the secrets of the past without having to add all of it together into some stew. Because like, basically, he's doing that thing where you go to Pizza Hut and you put every single soda in your cup and drink it, you know? And like, it just doesn't taste very good.
Yeah. Well,
look, Netflix asked for 10 episodes or whatever. We got to stretch this thing out, man.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Fuck it. All right, it's filler.
Sean Hancock, Netflix executive.
Uh-huh.
Did you see that his son is an executive at Netflix?
Oh really? Shit!
Oh, there's nepotism here. I mean,
I've kind of buried the lead there. I didn't know if you guys had seen that, but yeah, his son is an executive for unscripted television at Netflix.
Oh,
so,
makes sense.
Nice.
And that's his actual. That's like his son. That's literally.
That's really his son. Yeah, Sean Hancock. Wow. Yeah, I double checked.
Wow. Oh, good old SH.
There we go. There we go. We're learning.
Yeah.
Also, I want to name this episode "Coming for the Cock." I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but
look, gotta get the
skeptical
cock.
Cocks.
Destroy the cock.
Well, Trey,
destroy the cock. And the
this is coming Trey from the guy right in the one-eyed horse.
Right in the one-eyed horse. Everybody listening, I literally ran. It's a literal horse. It's not a metaphor. It's not anything.
Well,
what would Graham Hancock say? Is some hidden grain of truth in the metaphor.
It's obviously touching on something, buddy.
The horse is gay. I'll say that. The horse is gay.
Well, yeah, most horses are gay. Anyways.
I did one more thing about the Bimini Rocks when he was like, look, they're on a foundation stone, and it was just like another rock under the big rock.
It's just a rock, yeah.
And he was like,
foundation stone.
And he was like, that's impossible to happen. And I was like, I don't know, man. I feel like I've seen like little rocks under big rocks in my time. Like,
science can't explain it. Yeah. So if you think Graham Hancock's right, this bit of evidence isn't going to get you there. I think it was a wasted episode and we're just glossing over it. If you really think I'm stupid and we're missing something, just email me a hate thing and I'll respond to it. Anyways, fuck that episode. Episode 5 is the big boy. This is, I think, one of the best things that ever happened to Graham Hancock in his life. Basically, he has the hypothesis that civilization is older than people say. And then in Turkey, we find Göbekli Tepe, the number one tepe of all tepes. That name translates to Potbelly Hill, by the way. And I think that if people in the West just called it Potbelly Hill, it may have made him as famous because it doesn't sound as cryptic as Göbekli Tepe.
Göbekli Tepe, yeah, that does sound pretty
cool. Way cooler than Potbelly Hill, right? So, Stefan, you know a lot about this site. I know a lot about it now, too, because I spent way too much time researching it. But why don't you tell us like how it was discovered and what we thought it was at the time of its discovery?
A German archaeological survey was exploring the area in the 90s. And there was an area where these sort of stone slabs were peeking through the ground. It was initially believed that maybe this was like some gravestones from the Byzantine period, something like that. And then when they dug down, obviously it was immediately apparent that that wasn't the case. And so a big excavation was launched by Klaus Schmidt, who passed away last year. So it's a shame. I wonder what he would have to say about all of this. But German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, they excavated it. And at the time it was discovered, it was the earliest megalithic site in the whole world. The earliest, and it is an absolutely spectacular site. It's still like the culture that produced it still seems to be producing the earliest megalithic sites in the whole world. Whether Göbekli Tepe is actually the oldest still now is a bit debated. But
so what you're saying is in the understood model of archaeology and anthropology, this changed people's minds about the date of the largest site and what hunter-gatherers were capable of, correct?
Yeah. There was they
did change their minds then, and the orthodoxy didn't suppress the site.
Yeah, it did definitely change their minds. What people had, I think before Göbekli Tepe, I think people would have said agriculture came before these big megalithic constructions. Or you would get agriculture, and then you would get a town, and then this town would come together and build a big site like Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, basically you get hella food. There's enough food, so you can pay some food for a guy to get really good at carving rocks. Then you can carve some rocks, etc., right?
Yeah, or maybe not even to the point where you have craft specialization, but just that agriculture would allow enough people to be in one place at the one time.
Sure, yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
Like that.
Yeah,
but this dates to just before the development of agriculture. But this whole thing is so nuanced, and Graham Hancock mentions absolutely none of the nuance. Like, what is a hunter-gatherer? What is a farmer? It literally took thousands of years to develop, and people would have been at different points along that line at different times.
The gradient, because there's horticulturalists and stuff like that.
There's so much to say about that. And Graham Hancock destroys all nuance by saying it popped up overnight.
He does say that. He basically says this. They woke up one morning and decided to build these. And the day before they were hunter-gatherers, right?
Which is so disingenuous. Like he has to know that that's not what the narrative is.
I think knows. How could he not know that?
Right.
Well, I think people who would support him would say he's being just extra glib here, right? And he's like a little annoyed. But at the same time, it's like, man, you can't talk like that, you know? Like, people really need to know exactly what you're saying. Like,
yeah.
Because here's the thing, like we're saying, right, this is gradient. So what appears to have happened, and we're still learning a lot, because when they first found this site, Klaus Schmitz was like, man, this is not just a burial site. Like, people lived here, right? And like they started to dig it out. They found a bunch of these pillars, and they're like, okay, this was like a shrine or a gathering place of some time. And perhaps hunter-gatherers from different areas came here. And then we started to dig more and learn more. We find that there's dwellings there. People did live there. Right, we found a whole bunch of stuff.
Potentially, yeah. It's so hard to say. It's genuinely hard to say with these things.
True.
There's a lot of nuance.
For they didn't have agriculture. Graham says they did in an earlier book, but he doesn't mention that in the Netflix, because we find a bunch of wild cereals and a bunch of animal bones, but we don't find evidence of any domesticated crops. Right. Correct. We find a whole bunch of like grinding stones and simple tools of that kind. So a lot of people work in there, obviously. That was true. His hypothesis is that people were hunter-gatherers, and in his mind, like just running around the woods, maybe they had some kind of like mobile, like teepee kind of thing they could live in, but they were just running around. They couldn't build structures. And then one of these magicians from the society, which he believes could very possibly have been in the Americas at the time, but we don't know for sure. Maybe it's in a lost continent. He doesn't pin it down. But one of these magicians from the pre-Ice Age, Little Ice Age Cataclysm came over, taught these people his special methods for building, and then they built this place pretty rapidly. And they instilled a warning in it, warning us that we're going to be destroyed again in the future. And then they deliberately buried it. That's basically what he thinks the site is.
Oh, there's like a modern prophecy component. I did not know that.
Yeah. Which is
now,
crazy.
yeah. So the reason he thinks this is one of the things that he says was that the site was deliberately buried. Now, this is very important to him, and he's repeated this on the Joe Rogan podcast, in his book, on this show, and many different times that I've heard him speak. But the thing is, it was not deliberately buried, right? This is not true. The first thing to understand about Potbelly Hill, this site, is that it's on the side of a hill, and like erosion over time caused the dirt to, in different times, start to swag and crumble down onto parts of the pillars. We can tell that there's different dirt from different times that have done this. And then after some of that happened, it appears to be that they started building protective rings around some of the other pillars so this wouldn't happen. So this is a long, gradual process of them trying to keep the pillars intact and above ground. There's no evidence at all that people believe now, anyone who works at the site or that's publishing, that they were deliberately buried. And I think it's unlikely that Graham has not heard these counter arguments, but he's continued for 20 years or so now to say this exact point regardless.
I think I don't even know when the deliberate burial. I haven't read Klaus Schmidt's book about Göbekli Tepe, which is like the first big work on it.
Yeah.
But there was definitely the idea that it was backfilled. That Graham Hancock didn't make that up himself.
Yeah, Klaus told him it was possible so Graham went to the site and talked to Klaus, right? And Klaus at the time didn't know all what we know now. He passed away in 2014. This is an amazing find. He did amazing work, and he's the one who found it. But we have learned a lot since. So Graham's basically talking to a scientist who's saying, "Oh, this might be true, or we might think this," and he decided to pick out what he liked and pick those things to be true, and has not changed his mind since.
Yeah. It's I mean, it wouldn't even matter really if the room was backfilled. We do that now in modern construction.
Sure.
Like a house just down the road from me burned down the other day, and it had a basement in it.
Yeah.
And so people came in and backfilled the basement.
Yeah, deliberately as a warning to comets destroying civilization.
Years, about the hazards of leaving your oven on or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it wouldn't matter if it was backfilled. The idea that this is a time capsule is ludicrous. He makes it seem like all areas of the site were used at the same time. We definitely, I would say, don't know that. There's no real reason to believe that. Like with the pyramids in Mesoamerica, these sites evolve over time.
Well, also it's important to note that Göbekli Tepe is not the only tepe.
No.
There are other tepes, It's like that Seinfeld with there's another babka.
That was our babka.
You can't beat a babka.
We had that babka.
They're going to be heroes.
But what are we going to do now? If we can't get the babka, the whole thing's useless.
How about a carrot cake?
Carrot cake? Then why is that a cake? You don't make carrots into a cake, I'm sorry.
Black Forest?
Black Forest? Too scary. You're in the forest. Ooh. Hey, how about a Napoleon?
Napoleon? Who's he to have a cake? He was a ruthless warmonger. Might as well get a Mengele.
That was our babka. We had that babka.
What's this one?
That? Cinnamon babka.
Another babka?
Yeah, that was something I really didn't get. Like, he made a big fuss about Enclosure A at Göbekli Tepe being the oldest and also most elaborate. But again, I think it's very important to note, like, archaeologists, I'm sure, would leave plenty of room in their minds to adjust the dating of Göbekli Tepe.
Sure.
Because, all the time you have to ask yourself, what am I actually dating here? And what is its relationship to everything around it? But anyway, let's say for now, Enclosure A is the oldest and it's the most elaborate.
Yeah.
And he makes a big deal out of it because he's like, how could these people just pop up and start doing this?
We have sites across the valley on different mountains with their other tepe sites that have similar T-shaped pillars.
Yeah, and then the next site they get, so the whole focus is like Enclosure A is the oldest and it's the most elaborate. How could this be the case? How could this be the case? And then he's like, at our next site, Karahan Tepe, which may be older than Göbekli Tepe. And it's like, so now Enclosure A is not the oldest. And
so you can see, look, he has a hypothesis about somebody coming over and teaching them, right? But like I just like spitballing out of my head, I'm like, I can think of a pretty understandable human scenario that could explain how this happened. You basically have a field that is fresh with game. Like there's just way more herds of elk or whatever they're hunting, because the elk move in big herds, right? Or like, the streams are filled with fish, and you get one charismatic leader, and he or she is just like, hey, we don't need to run around with these elk. They come down here. We know where they come. I'll kill 15 of the elk. I'll get my boys and go get them. We'll bring them back to the hill, and we'll come here every 3 months, and other tribes can come and trade us some of the stuff that they make for our elk meat, because we're the best at fucking killing elk there is. And then like that works out. So they build some more stone stuff there, and people stay there, and it becomes eventually perhaps a dwelling, or it's a trading depot. And then the one king guy dies. And so like, they still do it for centuries because it's tradition. But like a lot of times when you get one big charismatic guy, when he dies, the tradition kind of degrades over time. So the site isn't as good, or the new buildings aren't as good, but it's a place where people meet to trade their fucking elk meat for beads or whatever they want. Like, why is that not a more realistic story than people from fucking Magic Land came over and gave them Narnia powers and stuff? Like you can just make a hypothesis like that sounds probable without the need of any of his stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the thing is he builds like this false, like we talked about it before, like he builds this false image that the people that were living there were simple or whatever. What does he say? Like simple and
he's always referring to hunter-gatherers as like simple,
yeah,
not capable of anything.
Which is funny from a biological perspective, because predators are normally like the smarter, more crafty, than the prey. And so like hunter-gatherers, like Homo sapien hunter-gatherers, they literally like long-form track things and learn how they live and hunt them down and kill them. Like they're really smart animals, right? So
it's rhetoric that I've heard like ancient aliens people use. Like I've heard like it's very similar to like David Childress like at one point says like of like Pumapunku, which is in South America. He was like these were hunter-gatherers practically right out of the Stone Age or something along those lines. It's like, no, they weren't. This is like the 1300s, like, and like they have agriculture and civilizations and organization and leaders and stuff and manpower. Like it's, I don't know, it's very reductive, and I know he makes this false image to support himself.
Yeah, and like, if game was extremely prevalent in this area, it changes how you get calories, which changes what you need to focus on, But
well, I think what we have to bear in mind is that the gathering aspect of hunter-gatherers is always overlooked. And like where Göbekli Tepe sits is the region where wild wheat lives naturally.
Yeah,
and a lot of
we found a bunch of that wild cereals at the site. We knew they ate it,
and it still grows there. Like wild wheat still grows around Göbekli Tepe, which is always like a nice photo.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and so I think how you've got to imagine it is like we know from that region people have been using plant resources intensively for sure, like well over 20,000 years. We have a lot of evidence of that, of sites in that region. Then this event called the Younger Dryas happens. We leave the Ice Age once and for all, and the climate is becoming warm and stable. And so maybe you can continually gather the same plant over and over again. Maybe you can, like the kinds of plants that thrive in your environment now are very consistent and very stable. And you're able to, like a hunter-gatherer who is gathering wild wheat and a Neolithic farmer who is farming domesticated wheat, their lives are probably very similar. We call one
it's not like they're planting like it's not like they're planting like modern corn, like in big rows and getting really high plot. Like early agriculture farming wasn't going to be that good for a while, right? It takes a while to make it work well. So
yeah, I think, and what I last read, I think I'm remembering this rightly. Like from the sites, these super early Neolithic sites, when you first start to see like a couple of domesticated grains in basically a whole batch of wild grain, to the point where that flips, and all of a sudden now it's like the vast majority are domesticated grains, and there's just a few wild grains. That time period is something like 3,000 years.
Yeah, it takes a while, right?
Yeah, it takes super long time to domesticate these plants. These people aren't, I don't even think they're aware they're in the process of creating farming. They're just gathering wheat, they're consuming wheat, they're also consuming a Göbekli Tepe like deer and things like that, but because they definitely don't have domesticated animals yet.
I mean, yeah, just the natural process of you selecting the wheat and carrying the wheat will make it so that the wheat that is most edible to you, the seeds get carried over a longer distance, which allows them to grow in more places. So I'd say that is an artificial selection mechanism on the wheat. So even without any idea of the cultivation of this crop or how to domesticate it, they would already be having a selection pressure on the wheat to change its evolutionary trajectory. You know?
Yeah, and they're probably managing the landscape to encourage the plants they like.
Sure.
The line between a hunter-gatherer community that is heavily invested in wild cereal grains and an early farming lifestyle, they're probably leading extremely similar lives. That's all I'm saying. But we have this clear-cut division in our head between hunter-gatherer and farmer that just in reality wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason why a community that's living like that can't build Göbekli Tepe, because they're basically living the same lives as the people that built Stonehenge. They're basically living, similar lives to the people that built all the big megalithic sites across Europe, all these Neolithic sites. There's not a vast difference between their lifestyles, I would bet. They're probably still a little bit more moving around at Göbekli Tepe because they're presumably not sowing fields and stuff, but so much of their life is so similar to a Neolithic farmer's, I would bet.
So the next big point of evidence at this site, and probably the most famous thing of this site, is what we call Pillar 43, or the Raven Pillar. It is a large T-shaped stone pillar that has several animal carvings on them. We see a scorpion, we see a vulture, there's a sphere, and then there's some shapes up top. What do you think about this pillar? It's obviously an amazing find, and it really kind of makes your mind like curious. It really does make you think what it means. Like I can see like kind of making your own hypotheses about it and really kind of exploring it. I get why Graham is so interested in it, and so many people are.
Well, yeah, from the archaeological perspective, one hypothesis about what's going on at Göbekli Tepe is, and again, I use the term hypothesis very literally, we don't know. This is just an idea that could explain some of that evidence.
But I thought that archaeologists were all arrogant and thought that they knew everything. So it's weird that you said that, yeah.
It's weird that you said that.
Yeah. One of the hypotheses, aka confirmed facts, is that one of the odd things is that we have these sites, but we don't really have many human remains from the time period. So there's an idea that they're practicing like sky burials, and
with birds,
maybe with birds, like is still practiced in some regions of China, I believe, where someone is left sort of out in the open and they're consumed by vultures. Same
That's
thing.
like northern China, right? Like towards Mongolia.
Maybe, yeah. I thought, somewhere in that region, not Shanghai or Beijing.
Yeah, yeah, not just on the street of.
And there just seemed to be a lot of like vulture iconography in these sites at this time. So one idea is we don't have a lot of human remains. They seem to be drawing a lot of vultures, carving a lot of vultures. Others two things connected to this. Does this culture practice like excarnation, I think is the technical term. But obviously we don't know because we can't ask them. It's just an interesting idea with the clues, the grains of information that we have.
So let me ask you a question. There's a scorpion on this. So that this proves that they knew about astrology, right?
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, why don't you think so? Because I'm playing Graham Hancock's kind of guy here. So, there's a lot of sites here, a lot of stuff here that lines up to stuff in the sky. And if you take some of these animals and you move them around some of the stars, and you can see that these are early astrological shapes. I mean, look at the scorpion. How can you say that the scorpion, which we know is so important to astronomy, isn't connected to that? Doesn't that make you think?
So is Graham Hancock? So does he think that the scorpion on their core is the Scorpio?
Yes, he thinks that is a proto version of Scorpio.
That's so silly because even amongst different cultures they have different interpretations of constellations.
Yes, that's true.
What Scorpio in Greek astrology is like a wagon or something in Chinese. I'd have to look at the examples, but no, we have clear examples where they just clearly do not match.
But look at the littler vulture shape. Couldn't that be Pisces?
Probably not.
There's
no reason. I don't know. They just saw an easier explanation is that they just saw a scorpion and drew it, or it was part of their religion. I don't know. It doesn't there's no reason to believe that it has to do with stars, right? Constellations.
Well, you can line things up to the stars, right? And we have a program on an iPad.
Oh no! Do they do the same thing? Do they?
Yeah. So he goes into a replica that is built of Göbekli Tepe, which is a really awesome replica, very cool. And look, when you look at this site, your mind does wander. You do wonder what these people did and how it all happened. Like I said, I don't think that it's wrong to feel a sense of awe thinking about this stuff. But you just can't say, I know what happened and it's this crazy thing you wouldn't believe without really good evidence, know? And and also, this is an aside, but it's one of the reasons why I wrote Clovis is these people mattered in the grand history of humankind. They helped us get where we are, and their individual opinions and their stories and their struggles, they mattered. They're some of the important people that helped build our future. And if we just look at them and put our own desires and wishes and thoughts on them, we're kind of killing our ancestors, we're just stealing from them all the work and stuff that they did. And I just find that to be unromantic and unkind, and I don't like it. I think that they deserve to be interpreted in the way they wanted to be interpreted, and which we can't know perfectly. We can't know, but we got to try. That's all I'm asking. Just try. He talks to Martin Sweatman at this site, and he makes it seem like this is a scientist he's going to talk to, right? This is one of his friends and a person who goes on tour and talks and stuff with him, So again, I feel like that's lying. He creates a false version of events that, he's going to go talk to an independent scientist to confirm some of his claims, but he's not. He's going to talk to a peer, to a friend. And not saying that I think is disingenuous. But anyways, he gets on his iPad. He is a scientist, but he is not an archaeologist.
No.
And there is a YouTube back and forth of competing essays about his findings. And you can watch those and see what you think about his ability to defend his hypothesis if you want to. Ancient Antiquities has an argument with him on YouTube, which I'd recommend. But anyways, he has a magic iPad that proves that all these symbols line up with all these star symbols and stuff. But like I said, I find that level of evidence to be just extremely a nothing burger. It's just I don't know. What do you think, Stefan, of that stuff?
It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
Martin Sweatman is a scientist. I can't remember exactly what his field is. He is a genuine scientist.
I believe he's a physicist or a chemist.
He may well
be. He wasn't an archaeologist. Yeah.
And he's just come up with this odd idea if he can. So he starts with the assumption that the animals on Pillar 43 represent the zodiac star signs. We have truly no way of knowing if that's what the creators of Göbekli Tepe intended, but that's his belief.
And it would change the way we understood those symbols came to be and what were shared, So.
Well, you can't project these things back in time 10,000, 11,000 years. There's really no good reason to do that. But he believes that they're star signs. And then he just somehow believes that if you look at their position on here and you think about their position in the sky, it's like a calendar or blah, blah, blah. that points to the time of the Younger Dryas, coincidentally. And
everything does. They always find a way to make
all roads lead to the Younger Dryas with these guys, and it's just ludicrous, because to be so confident in an analysis of an 11,000-year-old piece of artwork is insane. Like, imagine how subjective art is now. Like, let's say someone in 10,000 years from now found the foundations of a church with a cross in them. Are they going to reconstruct like all the nuanced beliefs of Christianity from that information?
Yeah, no, I think what he's doing is on par with like numerology, right?
Absolutely,
like, yeah. He makes a statistical analysis, which he backs up with his math expertise. But to my mind, he does not understand like Bayesian and reasoning. He does not understand how to do this analytical information, because he keeps adding different layers of complexity to his hypothesis. And then when he gets to the end, he says, well, because I have a sound argument that leads from here to here, and because it was so complex, therefore it's more likely to be true. But that's not logical. Because he creates a probability that all these things would line up the way that he positioned them. But he has a subjective positioning. He even writes in his own paper about this, of like where the symbols are. And every time he does that, he adds a layer of complexity, which should make you less serious about your hypothesis. But I don't know. I think he does bad science. I think his reasoning's bad. And I think the way that he was positioned on this show is disingenuous. Even if you find his argument convincing, they didn't need to lie about his association with Graham Hancock, which they did do.
I think it comes across as nonsense, truly. Like, I don't think someone's going to watch that part of the show and think, oh, shit, it's a calendar. Like, it's just, to me, is so unconvincing. Like, it's so
I find all the star stuff to be like the worst stuff. But if that does convince someone and you're wondering, well, why aren't you guys debunking that more closely? It's just, I don't know. It just seems like such a nothing burger to me. I don't know. So, I
mean, there's nothing to debunk.
Yeah, there's nothing to debunk, right?
You can't ask the artist what they intended. And I love prehistory as much as the next guy, probably a little bit more than the next guy.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the things you have to accept is like, we literally will never know what the images on Pillar 43 meant to the person who carved them. We will never, ever.
He asks one of the guys, right? He's like, this is a different part, but since you're leaving, he's like, oh, we don't know what this thing is. And the guy's like, yeah, man, we don't know. And he's like, yeah, but it could be this. And he's like, well, we don't know, man.
He doesn't like that. Like, he doesn't like the idea of we don't know.
It's like a gotcha. You know, basically, yeah, that's how science works, man. We don't always know.
Because it's like the Venus figurines. Like, we'll probably never know what their actual purpose or meaning or intent was. And it's just what we're gonna have to accept, because it's a prehistoric culture that didn't record that stuff.
Yeah, you just have to accept that. It's just this is why this thing is so much like a religion, because they're trying to find answers where there really can never be any.
Yeah.
And they don't have an agreed upon method to even analyze the stuff to try to find answers. They just kind of go on a journey and see where it takes them, you know? But like, it's just going to take you anywhere, man. And then you're going to be like, oh, this is where I was meant to go. You know, it's just not reasonable. This isn't really relevant, but he also says that they fought people that used to fight saber-toothed tigers. And I just thought it was funny. He said saber-toothed tigers instead of saber-toothed cat, because it just shows that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's even around by then still?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Like, it would have to be like Homotherium, that's like, you know.
I just thought that was funny. I'm like, why do you say that? There's a reason to say that.
It just kind of shows that like he doesn't really know the paleo.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But if you're gonna come off as like educated, like ancient world science guy, you wouldn't think you'd say that at all. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, here we go. Check this out. Saber-toothed cats apparently survived until 28,000 years ago.
Oh yeah,
so it's like his model.
Turkey though.
Yeah, that was in the saber.
But they're in the Americas.
Netherlands. No, that's the Netherlands.
The Netherlands, because they'd be in the Americas. There'd be saber-toothed cats.
Like with people that think like Smilodon, when people think saber-toothed cats, that's probably what he's thinking. I'm assuming.
Yeah, but there's a bunch of different kinds, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so here's a thing I have come to understand about Hancock, right? I think it's really important for why he says these things, and then us, materialists, aren't buying it. It's because the materialist argument alone didn't convince him, and he's only making half of his argument. Hancock believes that the cosmos is made up of the spiritual and the material, and the material is fine, but the spiritual has a more sacred wisdom and a more sacred knowledge.
Of the TV signal to the TV set, and in that case, when the TV set is broken, of course, the TV signal continues. And this is the paradigm of all spiritual traditions, that we are immortal souls, temporarily incarnated in these physical forms to learn and to grow and to develop. And really, if we want to know about this mystery, the last people we should ask are materialist reductionist scientists. They have nothing to say on the matter at all. Let's go rather to the ancient Egyptians, who put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on the problem of death.
He believes that a lot of cultures experimented with psychedelics, such as ayahuasca, and they gave them visions of real truths and important knowledge that helped them unlock technologies and things that we don't understand. And that he has done these things and gone on what is basically vision quests that have given him imparted knowledge and understanding of the past, and connecting all these different stories and sites together, which give him a better and clearer picture of the past than we materialists can do with our science alone, right? This is an important part of his understanding of the world, is this revelation through these things. The reason he mentions that certain spots are sacred or at springs where people still pray there today, but that the pyramids have this shape, isn't just because there are similars in culture. He thinks that means this is proof that these are fonts of spiritual, metaphysical knowledge. And the fact that these people in the past all could pick up on that metaphysical knowledge meant that they had education or a connection to lost spiritual technology that we do not have today. And since people all around the world did that, it shows that they were likely in contact with each other.
Oh gosh! So this is a thing that he's written about, like
he talks about this. That this is what he believes. My understanding, and I think if you're a big Graham Hancock supporter and you don't believe this because you only watched the Netflix special, go listen to him talk about other topics. He has TEDx talks where he talks about all this stuff pretty specifically, about all this sacred knowledge, and talks about how, he's a dualist and believes that we are basically beacons for spiritual and celestial knowledge, right? These are things that he believes.
I think all of that is 100% true, but I think if you want to know what Graham Hancock believes, you got to watch his interviews and shows with Gaia. But I don't have access to them, and I'm not willing to pay for them.
No, yeah.
But I bet there he lets the cat out of the bag a little bit more.
Yeah, and in his book about the Americas, he basically describes that these shamanistic people had all these powers and stuff, and that's why this British Empire, that this ancient British Empire level society could have existed from there. Additionally, when he is asked why don't we find stone tools and what we consider modern construction methods in these old archaeological sites, he says there's a reason for that. They didn't want to make them. They didn't want to make steel. They didn't want to make plastic because they didn't need them, because they had psychic powers. Right?
Is this why there's no metallurgy or whatever?
Yes, they didn't need that. Our modern world was built wrong. We should have been built with dualism in mind, with a connection to our psychic and spiritual side. The people of the past knew this. So how did they move the giant multi-ton pillars into the pyramids? They used psychic powers, Trey. That's how they did it.
Is this a thing he writes about?
He talks about this.
People have psychic powers. Yeah.
Oh no! See, this is where the mask kind of comes off, and you see
he was on Joe Rogan, and they talked about how they moved the pillars, and they said they did all this, and they said, and his friend who's there, who's his co-writer and who worked with him, who Graham agrees with, said, yeah, this is the stuff that Tesla was figuring out.
What?
Insanely advanced, tens of thousands of years of a different path.
Yeah.
And that may be what we're looking at.
And that may begin to explain these otherwise inexplicable monuments that have survived.
Jamie, do I need... There we go. This is the work of Nikola Tesla. And he was... Again, this is way too much for us to get in today. That's why we need to devote a whole session to talking about this.
Okay.
But this is... this was the inspiration. You know, his work was suppressed. A lot of his patents were taken, sealed up by the U.S. government for whatever reason. I don't know. But this is some of the stuff that's now being developed using his ideas plus some of the others. This is the man I've been talking to for the last 7 years.
Malcolm Bendall?
Yes. And again, I don't want to get into it today, but like, here's an example of what they're doing. This is a generator that has no moving parts. It's all based on geometry.
See, it
all comes back. It's like all connected.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so the reason why Graham can't fully convince us and why we're like, why aren't other people seeing this is because some people buy into some of that spiritual stuff, but it's a huge part of his thesis. He does not believe that all this just happened in the material realm. He believes in a magical realm that influenced all this behavior. You know, it's important, and like, that's why we don't have this evidence. He thinks a comet hit the Earth and we can't find evidence that it's underwater. Ancient civilizations are underwater. Well, why can't we find the tools and stuff they use? Because they don't use them. They use magic, you know? So it's all non-falsifiable and outside the realm of science to really identify. So I don't know why he would be upset that scientists don't accept his evidence, because he's not even trying to do science, nor does he believe science is a sufficient means to explore the world, since he believes in a completely separate magisterium of information. That's my opinion on him.
Dang,
this is one of his shows from Gaia is actually on YouTube. Secret Origin of Humanity with Graham Hancock. This is the description. Since the dawn of time, the advancement of human civilization has been guided by an invisible hand. These unseen forces are interwoven throughout the fabric of every major institution, so nearly every aspect of our world is carefully calculated to their benefit. Their time is coming to a close. Jesus, I hope he's not talking about this kind of stuff. That makes him seem like a
conspiracy, like new, like
also
reptilians.
Again, there are a lot of people that like Graham Hancock and Ancient Aliens and this stuff that are not racist and don't do it because of this stuff. But you can see that people who are, this is useful to them, right? This jives. They're like, yeah, everything is controlled by an unseen hand. All these civilizations were lesser and needed people to come in and teach them. You're right, you know? So it is a problem. And
These
it is
are
worth talking about.
Like talking points and racist talking points that he's using. Yeah.
There are a lot of non-white people that find this stuff interesting. It's not only interesting to white supremacists, but it's useful to them. It works for them. Right, he doesn't do a lot to dissuade it. He doesn't mention that. He doesn't come in on this Netflix show and say, hey, unfortunately, some societies have used the Atlantis mythology for racism ideas or for colonialism. We're not going to do that, but we still think the myth is interesting and want to talk about it. You know, he doesn't dissuade it, you know, and like, I don't know, man. If people were using my stuff for racism things, I'd make sure, hey, knock it out. You know, I'd pop him on the head one. But he doesn't do that, so.
Because you have no audience. There'd be no audience.
Well, I said, I'm sure there's plenty of people that aren't racist that find this interesting, but you got to be worried when there's a lot of racists in your crowd. You know, it doesn't mean that it inherently is, but you just you know, check yourself. That's all I'm saying. Just check yourself. That's all. Here's the thing. Here's why Graham Hancock is interesting to people. He's like, here's a site you've never seen before. Here's a site you've never seen before. Those sites are awesome. They're very cool. Here's a story you kind of know. Here's another story you kind of know. These cultures kind of have similar stories, right? Scientists don't know why they're similar. And all those things are kind of true. Those things. And then he's like, what about this other thing you've never heard of? What if they're all connected from this story that I made up now? And you're like, oh, those things were connected. These things were connected. I'll just continue the connection line to his story. And so he weaves it all together in a fun way to follow, which does have some real archaeology and art in it. Just like Ancient Aliens. You watch Ancient Aliens, you see some cool paintings, you see some cool sites. But in the end, their conclusions are just nonsense. They don't follow from what's there. And they take this curiosity people have, that they really want to know what happened in the past. They just want to know so bad. and they pervert it. They pervert it with a lie, and it steals the past from people. It gives people, it quenches their thirst of curiosity with seawater. You know, it's never really gonna be enough for you. And I just think that that's sad. At the end of the day, I do not like Graham Hancock, and I wish that he would go away and let somebody else who wants to do this stuff seriously actually do it, because I think that he is polluting a lot of people's minds, and that's my opinion on the matter.
I just wish that they made an archaeology documentary. That's all.
Exactly.
I had heard of Cholula, but I don't know a lot about Mesoamerica, and I was like, man, Netflix, couldn't you have just made that? Couldn't you have just made like a 8-part series on the Aztec Empire? Wouldn't
that'd be awesome, right? Like awesome,
so good, yeah.
With like the CGI reconstructions and stuff. Like, no, I'd be dying for that.
I know, I'd love it so much. Get the experts in. Get whoever did the costumes and stuff for Rome's HBO.
Hell,
and just
give you or Trey a budget to do something. You guys could put it together. You know, like you guys make great videos. Like imagine doing one of those videos with $1 million budget and helpers. You know,
yeah.
Like there's a lot of people that can do this stuff. Like there's just no reason for this old guy who's bitter. And look, even on the Graham Hancock subreddit, people that like this stuff and interesting, they're like, man, he comes off pretty bitter. A little
so
whiny.
Yeah. Very whiny.
And I don't know, man. He controls the final edit on this stuff, I'm sure. And
he does,
I don't know, man.
They really messed up with the tone on this show, for sure.
Yeah, he's like, look, I uncovered all this stuff, and no one believes me. And archaeologists just think I'm stupid. And all they want to do is believe the same old shit, man. It's like, oh, bro, just if you got evidence, just, you know, show us, man.
Miles, when he reads that email later... Remember he reads an email from somebody else?
So we're not going to do the last 3 episodes of the show because we're kind of running out of time. But we'll address real quick. He does try to go to Serpent Mound, which is in the Americas, and they don't let him into film. And he gets this letter that Trey's about to mention.
Oh, yeah. He gets this letter that just says, like, yeah, we don't want you to film here. Like, and it's polite. It's a polite letter. It's not, like, mean or anything. And it's partly because Serpent Mound has had to deal with crazy people in the past, and they just don't want to deal with anymore. Where
they've denied like Bigfoot teams coming in there and stuff before too, so it's not like a new thing. It's not about him. They're just, you know, pseudoscience stuff they're trying not to let in there.
Well, they have problems with like evangelicals thinking it's a portal to the underworld and shit.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Now look, there's an argument about this on a couple archaeology Facebook groups about if this was right, if this was a good ethical principle, or if this was censorship to not allow him in. What do you guys think about that? Do you think this is good that he wasn't allowed in, or do you think it's wrong?
I don't think it's censorship as such. I don't know.
What do you think,
Trey?
Well, you don't want.
I have an opinion, but
you don't want to give them ammunition. Like, I don't know. It's like if the site doesn't want like a person to have a documentary crew on it, like that's their choice, I guess.
Yeah.
I think one of their main jobs is public education.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So this kind of thing flies in the face of that, I would say.
Right. It runs counter to their whole point, you know.
So my position was if Graham wanted to fund a scientific paper that needed the site for some reason and wanted to get approval and do proper science and then see what that science said and then talk about that in his book or something, if he did it properly, he should have access to it. Because they don't like his opinions shouldn't mean he could do proper science there and get it published. I think if he was not allowed to do that, you could say that might be unethical censorship. But what he wants to do is shoot a for-profit Netflix documentary at the site. He's not there to do science. He's not on a fact-finding mission. He just wants to get his views out on a for-profit television show, which the site's job is not to help him do that. It's to protect the heritage of the site, which is also, you know, a Native American site, and it's a British guy wanting to come and use it to make money. So if they tell him no, I think that's fair in that context.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah. Anyways, it's been a very long episode. Oh, we're sorry for that. We didn't finish the whole show. We might wrap it up on the next one with another guest so we get another perspective in here. we're not going to do a Monster Quest this episode. The next Monster Quest episode sucks anyway. So.
The New York Sasquatch.
Did you watch it?
New York Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Did you watch it, Trey?
I didn't even watch it because I knew we were doing this.
I could do it in 1 minute. We'll just do it real quick.
Okay. Should we let Stefan go?
Yeah, Stefan, you want to go?
Yeah, no disrespect to the listeners of the pod, but I have 2 very young children.
Yeah, go be with your offspring.
For being on the episode,
it was a pleasure. It's very cathartic talking about these things. I appreciate it. I was fuming last night watching the show in preparation, but I feel a lot better.
Rough, right?
Yeah. That's when he's like, archaeologists don't know shit. And I'm like, you don't know shit.
You don't know shit, Mr. Hancock.
Shouting at my TV, and my wife's like, what's going on? Like, he said the Younger Dryas was this, but it was this. And he hasn't taken into account wild wheat and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, yeah.
You haven't thought about the smell, D.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's always a reference. Sorry. Okay, leave.
It was a pleasure.
Go.
Thank you so much, guys. Always a pleasure.
Good to talk to you again,
buddy.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye. Pretty new listeners of the podcast that are wondering why we're doing this. We normally, for fun, watch an episode of the old History Channel Monster Quest series and then kind of go through like what we think of how they tried to find cryptids and stuff. So yeah, if you're here for the archaeology and wondering why we're talking about this at the end, this is what we normally do in the podcast, but it's an extremely short version for this episode. Thanks for listening. This is going to be a 1 minute Monster Quest. Give me a Monster Quest, Trey.
Monster Quest.
Monster Quest?
Let's start. Witnesses around the world report seeing monsters. Are they real or imaginary? Science searches for answers on Monster Quest.
Okay, in this episode of Monster Quest, they go and look at New York for Bigfoot. They look for Bigfoot a lot. They told us what Bigfoot was. Now they're going to go look in New York. Unfortunately, they're not going to look in the streets of New York. He's not going to be singing New York, New York, or wearing Yankees ball cap. No, they go look in the woods around New York. They find some people. Those people say, hey, I saw Bigfoot. They bring in a polygraph test. Now, polygraph tests don't really work, and, they just don't. They kind of measure something that kind of goes up and down when you're lying, maybe, but they don't really say if the person's telling the truth, and they're not all that reliable. And, that's why we don't use them to determine truth. But these shows like to do them. Shows like Murray like to do them. Good for dramatic television. So they put a bunch of eyewitness people, they polygraph test them, and then that gives us no evidence, because how could it possibly give us evidence? And then they look at some footprints and they go, wow, those are some footprints, and there's no new information, and there's nothing else to say. And at the end, they do not find Bigfoot, and then we go on to the next episode. Also, this is one of the lowest rated episodes of the show, and I really didn't want to talk about it, and so that's the Monster Quest for this episode. I love you all. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, say goodbye, Trey.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Tell them you love them, Trey.
Love you guys.
All right, that's nice of you.